Good morning, everyone.
Yep.
I'd like to call
Good
the
morning.
County Board of Supervisors meeting to order on Tuesday, October 24th at 9 a.m. Would you please join me in the pledge allegiance to the flag? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Oh, he hasn't been on leave for months.
Oh, life is good.
Yeah, I suppose they can't tell. They can't tell.
We have 20 present, 1 excused. Presentation of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence. We'll just go through this quickly. There's a letter from Joanne Johnson. There's a proclamation from Governor Walker concerning the AMVETS that was included in your packet. The Village of Sister Bay resolution in opposition to the Back 40 mine. Sheboygan County Planning, Resources, Agriculture, and Extension Committee letter of support to the Back 40 mine. Letters to legislators from the Legislative Committee, federal tax deductions, state and local taxes. Letter to legislatures from Legislative Committee concerning small cell legislation. There's also a copy of the unassigned fund balance. Susie.
Hi, I would like to talk about the two letters from the Legislative Committee. These are both items that came within the last week and a half or so from Wisconsin counties, and they were action alerts asking supervisors to call their legislators. The first one has to do with the federal government, the second one to do with the state government. And when I talked to Kyle Christensen about it, his comment was they didn't do a resolution as they normally do because these things are happening fast. In the case of the first one, the SALT, the state and local taxes, this is part of the tax reform that's going on in Washington, and the feeling that they are, or what they are hearing is that that's part of the proposal for tax reform to no longer let people deduct their state and local taxes. That would put pressure on local governments. It would be something that's not been done since 1913 when the IRS first sent out the first 3-page forms for people to fill out. And they're very opposed to it, and they really are wanting all of us to call our legislators. The Legislative Committee knew it would take a while if we did, if we went through the normal steps. And we didn't have a sample resolution, so we thought we would send a letter right away. And then if supervisors are willing to call their legislators, as WCA is asking, you would have talking points to use from the letter. And the second one has to do with small cell legislation. I'm going to ask my committee if they want to speak about either of these, or maybe Ken or Grant want to add. I know Roy knows a whole lot about the small cell legislation. So if others want to comment on why these are important to call your legislators.
Roy?
Yeah, the small cell legislation is saying that small cell companies can erect towers or their units on any right-of-way, town or county right-of-way, without the local board saying yea or nay. And that's taking rights away from the county board or the town board, and that's why we oppose it. In fact, I think Alan's got a good article from the article showing what could happen if you allow that, showing right next to sidewalks they could put their equipment.
Yeah. Dave?
In reference to the small cell, it's also not just simply taking away the rights, it also causes a number of actual health and human services issues. Things are being placed within walkways, they're being placed within right-of-ways, visual spaces to be able to see when you're making corners and stuff like that. So it's not just the aspect of the legal rights we have to maintain our right-of-ways, it's also the fact that these things are being typically placed for their best services, not necessarily for the pedestrian and driver's right-of-ways.
One other thing I would add about that first letter, the last bullet is data that came from National Counties Association. They gave data for each county and how if this were passed, how it would affect the household. So you'll see some local statistics as to people's taxes, how they might go up and so on.
Anybody else? Thank you. Public comment. Good morning, Joel. Sure, come on up.
Well, good morning. On the state level, our session is sort of winding down, so there are a few fairly big items still on the, coming up, but in general, I'm around here a lot more, which is why I'm here today. A couple of things that I guess you guys would be interested in. I think the big box legislation continues to move forward, so I would hope that would be passed into law and would help us all here. The conditional use legislation, and I just talked to Mariah again, and she and I have talked about it. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it would be restrictions on how local governments can deny conditional uses. The intent behind that legislation is good. I think that there are times when local governments have denied things just on a whim or just because somebody, their brother-in-law or whoever, doesn't want it next to him, those kinds of things. And the intent of the legislation is to make local governments just have to really prove why they're denying something, but some of those things are pretty gray, like the character of the neighborhood, so there's always that subjectivity in there, and I think it's pretty tough to pass legislation that's going to really do what the intent is. And the author of it has talked to Mariah. We've talked about it a good bit, and he's talked with the counties association, the town association, trying to make it better, but I'm not sure where that's going to go. The other thing I guess I'll mention just a little bit is NR 151, and I know you guys will be discussing that today. First off, I think it's important that we have new rules for our area. I think clearly the rules that we have do not protect our groundwater in this area, and it's something, with legislative days and all, we've been asking for many, many years. The problem, of course, is going to be, and you probably are hearing it from the small farmers that are very concerned that it could put them out of business. I think that there will be protections in there. The DNR, and again, I know Erin's going to talk about this, and she can give you her spin on it. But the DNR has promised me that there will be a variance procedure where the farmers would apply to the state, not to the county, for a variance if they simply don't have the land and there's nothing that can be cost shared that would put them into compliance. And then they would come up with an individual plan for their farm, whether it's splitting up the manure application, doing some of it during the summer and that kind of thing. So I think that the intent is not to put anybody out of business. If those rules are enacted and they were enforced strictly, certainly in northern Door County there would be no dairy farms left, probably, or very, very few. And in Door County in general, it'd be very tough. So I think there are some safeguards in there so that our farms can, that are in business can stay in business, I guess, while still protecting our groundwater. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Okay.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks.
Any other public comment?
I'd like to make some comments about the variance requests.
Approval of the minutes of the September 19th regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes as presented, Mr. Chairman.
Second it?
Any changes, additions, deletions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolutions. Appointment to committees, commissions, and boards. Board of Health.
Sure. I mean, there's two appointments, one where a person has stepped down because of a new job, and another person where their term is expiring. So I did work with Rhonda in terms of finding new appointments, and you'll see those listed on the sheet, and I'm just looking for approval for those to move forward. And also their bios are included on the page as well.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution 2017-59.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Provision of targeted case management services by Human Services Department and medical assistance, MA or Medicaid reimbursement. Mark?
I'll make a motion, we approve resolution 2017-60.
Is there a second?
A second?
Basically, this is allowing us to get reimbursed from the state on things we're already doing. And I think Grant has probably the best information if you have any questions.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next resolution, 2018 WLIP grants in aid to local governments application. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 2017-61.
Second.
And what it is, line 19, that the Door County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize submission of the aforesaid 2018 WLIP grant application and accept any such grants or Door County. It's just an okay to apply for the grant and accept it if we get it.
Questions?
Oh, and it's for the Land Information Office.
Any questions? Linda?
So if we apply for it, what is the likelihood of us getting any grants? And does this require extra time on behalf of the planning department? No.
Mariah?
No, thank you. These are grants, if you look in your packet, there was actually a chart on page 16 of your packet. The state tells you how much money you're eligible for each year, so I'm not really exactly clear why they call it a grant, because you're pretty much automatically guaranteed that you're going to get it if you submit the application. And there's 3 separate grants. One is a training grant to help offset costs for Tom or others in the department or county board members to undertake training related to land information products and services. And then there is a $50,000 award, which every county is eligible for, as long as you're making progress on your land modernization plan. And then there is a third grant, which is in complement with the funds that we get returned to us that come through Register of Deeds, and every county is eligible to apply for an amount that will bring them up to $100,000, including what we get from Register of Deeds and the state. And then that's to be used for special projects. Like next year, we're looking at a LiDAR project, and then also a new land records software system. So it's no extra time. It's just the same grants that we've been applying for years.
Dave?
Just a comment. Historically, these grants come through the IS committee. Because the department changes, it's now through the planning or land use department. So we've been doing this for the last 5, 6, 7 years, I believe it is. The word grant is also deceiving. It's not really a grant by our typical understanding.
It's more like shared revenue?
Yeah, the best comparison.
Any other questions? Thanks, Mariah. All right, we'll be going to the voter board for this one. It involves money. That has passed 20 yes, 1 absent. Next resolution, adoption of the Door County Flood Emergency Evacuation Plan. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make a motion to approve that resolution 2017-62. And Mariah is here to explain that one also. Or
I'll second it.
Sorry. I'm actually going to turn it over to Becky in a minute. As you'll recall, a handful of years ago, the EMS department decided to undertake a hazard mitigation plan. That's something the planning department had wanted for a while because it relates to our floodplain program and whether or not we are allowed to issue permits to properties that are served by roads that go below the floodplain elevations. So we did our hazard mitigation plan with the EMS department, and then we found out from the DNR that we needed to do an evacuation plan. So now we've done an evacuation plan, and I'll have Becky come up in a minute and explain exactly what all the material is. You had a separate packet that had all of the maps in it. But in short, this will ensure that if there ever were to be a flood, that the EMS department has a plan in place to notify the neighborhoods and get people out of there in time before their property floods. And it will allow us to go back to issuing permits to people whose homes are served by roads that go below the floodplain elevations.
Thank you. Good morning, Becky.
Morning. So would you like me to explain one of these maps? Is that what you're looking for? Okay. So these maps show certain areas of the county where there are roads below the floodplain, and that's shown in blue on these maps. And so it's not the entire county on these maps. There are probably about 20, 25 maps where there are areas with roads below the floodplain. And so what's shown in here are those roads as well as the actual floodplain shown in the light blue dotted areas. And then the lots that are served by the roads that are below the floodplain are shown in yellow. They're outlined in yellow. And then as well as the vacant lots that could potentially be served by those roads are shown in the, let's see, the highlighted yellow. So, and then what you're seeing also are red and orange and yellow colored dots and diamonds. And those are showing the potential depth of the flood in the event of a 100-year flood, a 1% chance every year. And so the colors signify yellow is 0 to 6 inches or less than 6 inches. Orange is 6 inches to 1 foot, and then red is 1 foot or greater. And then these maps also show areas where there is the lowest elevation or the greatest potential for, or the greatest depth of flooding, and those are shown in the larger dots and stars. And what we're going to do is ask property owners to, we're going to send them these maps and send them a letter identifying this plan process and the process that was used, and as well as the fact that the county board adopted this plan, and that we would like property owners to keep an eye on these areas in the event of a flood and take note of any water, standing water that's located in these lowest areas that are identified with the larger circles and the stars. And so that will be our process for potentially notifying the county of a potential flood warning or evacuation or a watch. So a watch would be, people would take note that there's flooding in the area due to the visual sight of water standing in the area. And then a flood warning would mean that the residents would have to evacuate. And so emergency services, we worked with them on a plan to notify people that there is standing water in these areas, and that in the event of a watch, they would need to consider possibly needing to evacuate the area. And then in the event of water standing in where the stars are located, which is along the road, that would be when an actual flood evacuation would be issued. And so emergency services as well as the police would knock on doors and let people know that there is flood evacuation in place. And so it's all lined out or outlined in this plan. And so the actual description of the maps is explained on page 5. And then we also identify roads that are below the floodplain in this plan. And then the process for notifying residents of a potential evacuation.
Any questions? Don?
Yes, are the townships and so forth in Door County going to get a free copy of the hard copy of the plan?
We can send them a hard copy, sure. Yeah. As well as just the maps for their area, or do you think they should get?
The whole plan
The whole
itself.
plan, okay.
Can that be picked up in the office then, or?
Sure.
Thank
John?
you.
So if somebody decides that my house is in a floodplain, does that mean now that my insurance company is going to get excited?
Sure.
Probably did already.
This doesn't change whether or not you're in the floodplain. This is just taking the information that we're given by the state and federal government and then creating maps that show the roads that go below the floodplain and then the homes that would need to be evacuated. But you're right that if your property is newly shown as being in floodplain, not through this process, but through whatever other process is going at the federal and state level, it might reflect on your homeowner's insurance. We're probably going to have that situation in about 2 years because FEMA has been working for a number of years on a Great Lakes-wide coastal study, and they're redoing all of the floodplain maps. And at any rate, there are going to be changes. So, and we don't really get to say anything about it. They tell us what the elevations are that we enforce, and the DNR gives us the text to enforce, and away we go.
Steve?
Job creation is good.
One comment I would make on those maps, it would be nice if on the top of the map it said what municipality you serve, so you don't have to dig way down to the very bottom of the
Yeah.
ledger to find
In
it.
most instances, I can do that. There's maybe 2 maps where it crosses 2 municipalities, and I can just list both municipalities. Sure.
Just
And there's
something I
also
noticed
shorthand
that'd be
and-
quicker, you know, to find
Sure.
if it was a little more.
And there's also, it might not be obvious to most people, but if you look at the title of each map, there's shorthand for each town, so like GB is Gibraltar,
Right.
or NP was Nassau, but yeah, we can.
Dave?
Yes, I have a question, I guess, regarding the very first item on page 26 is the Anapee River, towns of Gardner and Union. The Anapee is not in Union, and it should probably be Brussels, as well as County Highway H is located in Brussels. The paragraph above it talks about there being no segments of roads below the BFE in the village of Forestville, and under the Anapee, there is one under the village of Forestville. So those are some that I noticed right away because of representing Union. I hope others have looked closely at these listings.
I can review those areas again. What I used is LiDAR data and then the base flood elevation that we got from FEMA. So anywhere where the elevation of the road was below the LiDAR, or the flood elevation, LiDAR was below the flood elevation, that's where.
The location in
He's
the
saying
wrong
you got the
township,
wrong municipality.
the wrong
Yeah.
towns. John, you're on County H.
Keep it over there, I don't want it.
You don't want it.
You can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Well, it's just, I like to see accuracy in these. I guess it's,
Yes, it is in Brussels.
I would ask that if I could get a copy of the letter that's going to go out to constituents, because 3 of the maps are in my district.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thanks, Mariah. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.
I'm assuming subject to review and correction. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next resolution, opioid litigation. I'll ask Grant to address this, if you would. Well, first of all, can we have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Motion approved. I'll second.
This first came up, at least in a public sense,
Sorry. This is,
at the WCA's annual meeting, which happened just a few weeks ago. In the packet, there was 20-plus pages of explanations on the goals and what we need to do to move forward. In brief, the point of the opioid litigation is to allow the counties, and in our case, Door County, an opportunity to recover the funds expended on the opioid crisis by county programs and services. In theory, that sounds sort of like a simple concept. I can assure you that it is not. What we need to do, if the county board deems this appropriate to move forward, and I should say from the outset, despite some of my comments may appear to be a bit negative, I am in favor of the county entering into this. We need to establish that we have a right to recover. And that's one of the cons of this, getting involved in the opioid litigation. I should take a step back. First point is there's no cost to the county. There will be no attorney fees, and the law firms that are going to be representing the county will absorb all the cost. If there is a recovery, then the attorneys get paid, the fees and their out-of-pocket expenses, and then what remains of the settlement will be distributed to the clients. So there's really no monetary risk to the county, but that's a bit of a misnomer because, as I indicated previously, the county needs to be able to prove up its damages. That's going to require my office and a number of the departments Human Services Department, Sheriff's Departments, our medical examiner, the courts, and a few others to sift through the records and come up with costs that directly relate to the negative impacts of the opioid situation that we face. We won't know what those damages are until we get into that process. It doesn't really make sense to jump into that process unless we know that the county board is interested in pursuing a lawsuit. In terms of the pros of this, as I said, there's no actual out-of-cost to the county. The primary attorneys, and there are 3 law firms involved with this, will hire litigation and discovery assistance for the counties, which means somebody will be here on the ground assisting us in digging up the information and putting the information in a way that it's going to be able to be presented to a court. We can drop out of the litigation once it's commenced. It's clear in the retainer agreement at our option. So if we go down this path and at some point we determine that it's not worthwhile for Door County to proceed, we're able to jump out of it. The negatives of this is if we don't participate and go forward, you're not going to receive any recovery. There's no guarantee that any money will be paid, but if you don't join in the lawsuit, you can be guaranteed you're not going to participate in any recovery that occurs. As I indicated before, the county staff time to assist with discovery, and you know, again, there's just no clear answer on how much Door County stands to recover at this point, and that's one of the unknowns. But to kind of sum this up, this has been boiling or percolating in the background, and we're to the point now with the retainer agreement that is in your packet. I am comfortable with that. All the questions I've had have been answered. I should note, immediately after the WCA's conference, the attorneys that are involved had a telephone conference with all the corporation counsel in the state. And that lasted about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And they answered all the questions that we had. They provided writing where we wanted writing, some information in writing. And what you'll see if you've been paying attention to the press, in large part, most of the counties in the state either have or we anticipate will join this. So it's before you today in terms of whether or not you want to move forward and have Door County be involved in the litigation against what they've characterized as Big Pharma, which is shorthand for the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture, market, and sell the opioids. I don't know if there's any questions or you want further explanation. It's a fairly complex subject, but I think the decision before you today is relatively straightforward and simple. The county either wants to get involved with this or it doesn't. Understanding if we opt to get involved, there's no guarantee of any recovery. But at this point, I'll entertain questions, or if anybody wants any additional information.
Biz?
I don't really have any question, but I do have a comment. I looked into this a little bit, and whether the county would get any money out of this or not, I don't think is very important to me. This is an epidemic, and what's alarming about this is the numbers. In 2016, a 12-month period, there were 64,000 deaths in America related to this. Now, to realize how many people we're talking about, the Vietnam War lasted 10 years. 10 years, and there were 58,000 deaths. There's 6,000 more deaths in 1 year compared to the Vietnam War. You know, and that's how I say this is an epidemic. This is something that has to be dealt with. The prescriptions that went out to the millions of people and that they overdosed on this drug is so alarming. So, you know, I'm in support that Door County should be on board. And if we find out later that it's minimal for our particular county on the results of this, then we, like Grant said, we can opt out. But that's what I saw when I looked into it a little bit, and it's really, really alarming.
And Biz raises a point that I should have raised, and I apologize for not doing it. It's not only the monetary recovery, it's also putting a stop to it. And it's analogous, if not entirely, to the tobacco litigation that took place about a decade ago, that the counties in Wisconsin didn't receive any of the huge monetary settlement that all went to the state, and that's one of the reasons for initiating suit on behalf of the counties to sort of preempt that from occurring again. But also the big benefit is simply to put a stop to what's going on so that moving forward that the costs can at least get under control and not escalate as much. Again, no guarantees, but those are sort of the 2 points of going forward with it, if that's what you decide to do.
Laura?
Yes, I would like to add a comment. I'm very proud that resolution has come forward to our county. Several months ago, Grant and I had shared some information, or I shared some information with him on New York State, certain counties that were bringing litigation forward to these pharmaceutical companies. And at that time, it's just for a county of our size, we couldn't take that on for ourselves. So I'm very proud to see Wisconsin pulling together, and this is becoming counties uniting to do this, because that's the only way some people that are from a smaller county can proceed. Also, Grant, I'm happy to hear that the negotiation of the terms of the engagement letter are to your approval. I've heard that there was questions that if you can get opt-out. Also, if we all reflect on what's happened just in the last year or two through our county between the Sheriff's Department, Human Services, and the court systems of the justice systems, there has been quite a significant cost. What that numbers come out to be, we'll find out with the assessments that come forward. But as Grant has said too, this is just making a point that this is enough is enough. I think that this is just a starting point of something larger and looking at other healthcare issues of this merit system that now has come to be. So, thank you.
Linda?
If they must be fairly confident, otherwise you wouldn't have 3 very large professional law firms pitching this lawsuit. So if it even makes it past a summary judgment motion, I can see the defendants turning to their insurance carriers, the carriers turning to the medical profession, doctors, hospitals, anybody who's prescribing these medications as being liable too. So a very extensive, a very expensive process if you're assured that, 100% assured that we will not have any out-of-pocket for expert witnesses, cost advance, great, go for it. I'm also curious as to why Von Briesen and Roper are not going to be named as an attorney on the pleadings. Do they have a conflict or something?
No, my understanding is that they are facilitating the Wisconsin counties getting involved with one of the larger firms is in-state, the other firm is out-of-state. Those 2 firms have significant experience in this type of litigation, and they will be the lead attorneys. Von Briesen's role is to facilitate the county's involvement, and they'll act not necessarily as a go-between, because there will be an attorney-client relationship between Door County and all 3 law firms. But this is fairly significant litigation, and you want to have attorneys that have been down this path before. And the national law firm has, in fact, been involved successfully with litigation involving big pharma in the past. So.
Okay, and then you mentioned tracking costs and expenses. What time frame? Are we going back 7 years, the statute of limitations, or
we've
this
not
point going forward, and sheriff's calls and medical expenses and jail time? And I mean, this would be a huge tracking process requiring some manpower, correct?
Absolutely, and we haven't quite worked that out yet. If the county board agrees to I'll use the word jump into the litigation, then that forms the attorney-client relationship, and we will sit down Door County and each individual county that opts to be involved, and work with the attorneys that will be representing the counties and how we go about that process. And they, again, they will lend assistance in the terms of in people that have done this before, and also in terms of a process that you can go through to take a look at the internal records and try to relate specific expenses, whether dollar expenses or human resource expenses that the county has expended that can relate directly to the opioid crisis. So,
And it will not be a class action suit. It will be individual counties as plaintiffs.
correct. It's not a class action suit. There is a acronym and a term for it. It'll be multiple plaintiffs. And what you can expect, the little bit I know about this type of litigation, at some point there will be a plaintiffs not class, but a plaintiffs group named, and you want to make and a committee forms, and we want to make sure that our attorneys are on that committee, because then they will have more influence with respect to any discussion of a negotiated resolution. One of the things you pointed out, Linda, which I think is important, we need to think in terms of geologic time here. I don't anticipate this is going to be resolved in 2, 5, it could be 10 years, you don't know. We might be pleasantly surprised. But this is just our first tentative step, just dipping our toes in the water to gauge the temperature, and we'll see where it goes.
Anybody else? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. In opposition to the elimination of the J-1 visa program. Susan?
Were we supposed to have Aaron at 9:15? Oh.
Well, we could,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
why don't you finish that
Oh,
one?
well.
Why don't you finish that one?
We'll finish this resolution, then we'll move
Okay.
there.
All right.
Where's the timekeeper today?
All right, I move that we pass the resolution 2017-64 in opposition to elimination of the J-1 visa program. This one pretty much stands on its own. We all know, I think, how important this is to this county. You see the numbers of just this last summer. So it would be very, very hard. I think our chairman, among others, could speak to the problems this would cause.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, my personal experience is I would have a very, very tough time operating my business without the use of this program. So, well, hundreds of other businesses in the county also. Any discussion?
I actually thought, yes, please, thank you. Adding even more verbiage to be a little bit stronger to say that we're already struggling with our labor needs. I didn't see that into the resolution. Perhaps program that plays an important role in communities. If it's between, after 6, that if people would be comfortable with it, but I thought we could be a little bit more stronger in the resolution verbiage, that we're already a county that's struggling with labor needs, and businesses have been closing or not being able to stay open because even with the program. But if people feel it's worded fine out, then we'll just proceed.
You could make a motion to amend the resolution.
I'll make a motion that we amend the resolution to add in language that states that we're already a county that is struggling with labor needs, and even with this program, if we could add that perhaps in after line 6, the program always plays a role. I'll second that.
Okay, so what does it read now? After the amendment, what would it read?
So,
Paraphrasing.
I don't grant, I guess what I would suggest is it might fit better actually after line 9, because the
Line
first
9,
part is the
yeah.
United States. We can actually say many businesses in Dark County are dependent on the program to meet their seasonal labor needs. And whereas Dark County has a difficult time filling positions already
with the current program.
And then continue on with the whereas.
I'll second that.
Okay, so first we'd have to vote
On the amendment.
on the amendment. Okay, so this is, if you're in favor of the amendment, please vote aye. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so the amendment has now carried. So the next vote is for the amended motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay, so since our timekeeper has caught me, we will now have the presentation of the NR 151 rule changes by Aaron Hansen, County Conservation. Good morning, Aaron. I apologize.
Maybe just before she starts, just to give context, obviously this is something that you might have heard in the paper or news radio or something like that, and I know it's been discussed at LCC in terms of this, what's been going on with NR 151, and I thought, although there's still time in terms of where the process is and working with the DNR, and Aaron will cover that, I thought it'd be important just so you understand kind of what's happening, so that if you can have discussions or if you hear things, you have a way to actually explain kind of what's going on. So it's just more of a FYI informational session, but I'll turn it over to Erin and she'll walk us through the process.
Sounds good. Do we have the PowerPoint? So for those of you I haven't yet met, I'm Erin Hansen, head of the Soil and Water Conservation Department for the last 6 months. And as Ken explained, really what I want to do today is provide some information to you about some revisions to that cover manure spreading regulations in certain parts of the state that have shallow soils over bedrock. And as he explained, it's been a topic that's been in the news. You may be hearing about it, so I wanted to give you a little bit more information. So just what I want to cover today is a brief this is a brief summary of a fairly complex topic, so I'm going to try and fit it into the time we have allotted. I'm more than happy to share information with anyone who wants to have more details. We can make an appointment, we can sit down and talk about things. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. But basically just a background, how did we get to this point? What are targeted performance standards and what do they contain? And what are the next steps and where can people go for more information? So just to put our discussion in some context, I think it's important to recognize that the duties of our Land Conservation Committee come directly from Chapter 92 of our state statutes. And it discusses specifically centering around controlling erosion and non-point source pollution to protect for the purposes of soil and water conservation within the county. And we have a history of groundwater concerns in this county, going back to seasonal groundwater events that would occur more regularly, to tests that show us generally a third of wells that are tested are contaminated, unsafe for bacteria and or nitrates. And on occasion, whole neighborhoods can be impacted by serious spreading events that result in illnesses. The recent event in Jacksonport in 2014, and that's relatively recent, is one example of that. Door County citizens have expressed a strong desire to protect surface and groundwater quality. 94% in the 2009 survey said it was very important or important. It's a strategic priority for our county. We have it right in our strategic priorities, protecting natural resources, especially water quality. It's what our office does. It's in our land and water plan. These are our goals. And as recently as this spring and 2 years before, we lobbied in Madison at legislative days asking for changes to those uniform standards. This is a diagram that came from the handout that I provided today. You can take a look at this at your leisure, but essentially the idea that I want to convey with this is that we have bedrock underlaying our soils that is the result, that results in groundwater contamination. The idea being that what we do on the land surface, whatever source of pollutants are on the land surface, can easily be transported through surface features and also through the soil into fractures and bedding planes that carry that water directly into people's drinking water wells. In Door County, there's extremely rapid transport of contaminants Once they reach that drinking water once they reach those fractures and crevices, contaminants can travel quite readily and rapidly to people's groundwater. So the result of this rapid transport of contaminants can be seen when wells are sampled for bacteria and nitrates. And this slide I took from the UW Stevens Point water well viewer. It's not a scientific study, but it does provide a way of looking at well data on a regional basis and on different scales, at a county scale. So these are results that were voluntarily reported by homeowners and other agencies. And you can see based on the colors, I wish I had a pointer, but do I have a pointer here? Door County is orange, and in that it's 20 to 25% rate of contamination for bacterial contamination. This is only for pathogens, bacteria. If you were to add nitrates on top of this, you would be seeing more. But it gives you an indication of where Door County well data falls within the region. Thank you so much. Okay, this might be a little small to see, but again, these were more recent well samples that were collected in 2015 and 2016 by the UW Oshkosh voluntary sample in June, a time when we typically don't see rainwater and snow melt pushing contaminants down into groundwater, and still we're seeing hits of bacteria. They also have nitrate contamination, but because the rules are focused on pathogens, I'm just focusing on the bacteria here in these slides. In 2015, they had 477 samples, 12% came back positive for bacteria, and 3% with high nitrates. A repeat in 2016 with 392 samples. So this is a good cross-section of wells. They were looking at, they found 22% came back positive for bacterial contamination. So all of that background leads us to the current discussion about Chapter NR 151. And essentially what NR 151 does is it establishes base statewide standards for manure spreading and performance standards and prohibitions for agricultural operations. And these performance standards are designed to achieve water quality standards. They were established in 2002, some new ones were added in 2010, and there's provisions within Chapter NR 151 that if we implement those rules and we find, DNR finds that there is water quality is not being protected, they have the ability to develop targeted standards that are specific to a unique area that go further to protect water quality. The one thing that I do want to mention here is that in Chapter 23 of our county code, we have incorporated all of the performance standards and prohibitions that are currently in NR 151. So this is what we have right now. One of the performance standards is that all farms that apply manure or nutrients to cropland need to follow a nutrient management plan. So you guys all know where Door County is. I don't need to point it out. You might not be able to read that. It says 93% of the cropland in Door County is covered by a nutrient management plan. Our Soil and Water Conservation Department has done a really good job of implementing the current performance standards and prohibitions. We are among the top counties that have cropland covered by nutrient management plans, yet we still have groundwater contamination concerns in this area. So that's what that tells us, is that the uniform standards that apply across the state are not sufficient to protect our groundwater quality. So DNR identified that, and in the summer of last year, they developed a scope statement to look at what additional performance standards are needed in these sensitive areas to protect groundwater quality. And what's proposed, so these are proposed standards, they're not in effect right now. They would be requirements for what's defined as the Silurian bedrock area. It's eastern Wisconsin, it's in northeast Wisconsin, and extends down the lakeshore down to the county, to the state line. And essentially what they do is they establish additional requirements. So it's not that the current standards that apply across the state remain. They're establishing additional requirements that will apply to farms that are within this area where there is 20 feet or less of soil over Silurian dolomite. Where there's less than 5 feet of soil, there is a requirement for verification of how deep the soil is. So we have soil survey maps that were generated for a different purpose that aren't intended to be used on a field-by-field basis to identify soil depth. So what this means is we have a way of knowing where people should be looking for shallow soils. In those areas where we know that there's potential for shallow soils, there's a requirement for verification before manure is mechanically spread. So this doesn't apply to grazing, rotational grazing operations. It doesn't apply to fertilizer, commercial fertilizer applications. This is specific to mechanical application of manure. And it follows the tenets of nutrient management. So when one discusses nutrient management, we say we want to get the nutrients in the right place at the right time from the right source at the right rate. And essentially what these proposed standards do are provide additional requirements for these very sensitive areas. So in the right place, an example would be having setbacks from wells and other conduits to groundwater. Currently, a farm that is large enough to need a permit from the state, we call those CAPOs, they have a 100-foot setback from a well, a private well, or a 1,000-foot setback from a municipal well. A farm that doesn't have a permit that's below that threshold in terms of size would have a 50-foot setback. So that's what we have right now. What the rule proposes is to have a 250-foot setback from a well that's private or 1,000 feet from a municipal well. So that's what I'm trying to get at, and I won't go into the details of each and every one because the rule is fairly complex, but what I can say is that in terms of getting in the right place, it's identifying setbacks in those really sensitive areas to ensure that manure, when it's spread, is spread far enough away from those direct conduits to provide that buffer. Right time and source and rate, I'll give just a little bit more because I think this is where people are paying attention. So on the left, you see depth to bedrock. That column shows that there's different areas that are different, they've identified, 0 to 2 feet. So less than 2 feet of soil over bedrock. There's these proposed rules have no mechanical application of solid manure or liquid manure. So then the next two columns separated out by solid manure or liquid manure, recognizing that liquid manure from a CAFO is the same as liquid manure from a farm that might be just below that threshold. All of the large primitive farms right now follow this setback for no spreading of liquid manure, no spreading of manure over soils that have less than 2 feet. So what this does is this brings everybody to that same standard of no manure spreading, recognizing that 2 feet or less of soil is an extremely vulnerable place to be spreading manure. Also knowing that farmers can employ additional practices to reduce the risk in 2 to 3 feet and 3 to 5 feet of soil. DNR has identified, depending on the manure type, solid or liquid, that the manure spreading is available if one employs additional practices. So the first talks about incorporating within a certain time frame of solid manure. That's to mix the manure into the soil to hold it in the soil. And at least one of these things, looking at the right rate, the right time, so applying manure at a time when crops will be actively growing to take up the nutrients is one of the options that farmers can select, or treatment to reduce pathogen load. And so you'll see here, there's options for solid manure and liquid manure. The rate is always going to be limited by the nutrient management plan to what the crop needs. but there's also rates to ensure that there isn't over-application that could lead to contamination issues. What we recognize here is that 3 to 5 feet is still extremely vulnerable, but there is the ability for incorporation to a slightly deeper depth. So we're talking about going from incorporation at 4 inches, within 4 inches of the soil, to just 6 inches of the soil. So essentially, all of these same conditions flow down to the 3 to 5 feet. The point here is that there is opportunity for farms to spread manure in that 2 to 5 feet area of soil with these additional practices. So how does that play out here in Door County? In this map, and it might be hard to see in the back, but I can share copies with anybody who's interested. What we have here is we have red that shows soil depth of less than 24 inches. Again, this is based on our soil survey. The kind of pinky colors, that's where we've overlain cropland over that soil depth. So keep in mind, we have total land area and then we have cropland area. And so when you look at countywide, less than 2 feet of soil over fractured or over the bedrock, total land area, we have 23%, cropland, we have 18%. And as you know, it depends on where you are in the county. But countywide, we've got 18% in this category. Verify or special conditions, those are soils that are either right on that edge of being 24 inches or less, or they're in that 3 to 5 feet range. And so verification would be needed if somebody wanted to mechanically apply manure in those areas. Those would be the yellow, and there's less of the yellow area. And it shows up a little bit differently when you overlay cropland. An example would be down on the bottom. Down in the bottom here, you could see where the green is slightly different colored because of the cropland that's overlain over top. The green is greater than 60 inches of soil. So I mentioned that it depends on where you are in the county, the percent of the cropland acres. So if you're in northern Door of the county, northern Door, so our upper Door watershed, when you're looking at 0 to 2 feet of soil depth over rock, it's about 1/3 of the cropland acres. And then falling into that next category of 2 to 5 feet, where you either need to verify whether it's actually greater than 2 feet of soil or employ those additional practices that we looked at on the other table. That's another 1/4 of the cropland. And then about 40% of the cropland in northern Door has 60 inches or greater of soil over rock. So what I'm trying to do here is tell you that we can look at our soil maps and we can get some indication of what the cropland acres are. It's going to depend on each person's operation, what cropland they operate, and which fields they have available to them and the soil depth in those fields. But that's something that we can look at and work with individuals to identify where do they fall. In southern Door, it's different. In the Red River Sturgeon Bay watershed, which is the land that drains towards Green Bay, the percentage of cropland that has less than 2 feet of soils is 13%. And greater than 60 inches, we've got about 70% of our cropland. So it really does matter where you are and where your land base is. If you're a farm that's spreading manure, these rules are going to impact you differently depending on where you are. So where are we now? This is the timeline for the proposed targeted performance standards. And I mentioned already that DNR made that determination in the summer of 2016 that groundwater was not being protected by the current uniform statewide standards. They convened a technical advisory committee that was a multi-stakeholder group. It had representatives of agencies, professionals who have researched this topic for years and years, experts on this, along with representatives from industry and concerned citizen groups. So there was a broad range of people represented on these committees. They took the information, came up with these targeted performance standards that we are now looking at as a draft. There was a public hearing, and that's where we're at right now. The public hearing was September 15th, and the public comment period has now closed. DNR has received the comments on the draft rule and are reviewing them. According to DNR's timeline, they're looking at fall to winter to bring the targeted performance standards in front of the Natural Resources Board. The last time I talked to them, they said they were looking at December meeting of the Natural Resources Board. It then goes through the legislature. So the point that I want to make is that there's going to be opportunity. Our office submitted soil and water. I submitted comments during the public comment period. The Land Conservation Committee also submitted a letter of support for the proposed rule with a request for clarification about the implementation. How is this really going to be implemented? Because there are some questions that are not clearly answered. There will be additional opportunity, perhaps, to weigh in on these rules, especially if they do not move forward in a timely way. We may be coming to the county board looking for your support, depending on how things move. So the next steps, even after the targeted performance standards are adopted, what I'm really trying to show here is that change isn't going to be happening overnight. So DNR likes to say, in their targeted performance standards, they outline that you're making a cake, but the recipe of how you make the cake will come in the technical standards that are contained within DACCAP, that's Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. They're ACCAP 50, and that needs to be updated to identify those technical standards that will apply. For example, how are you going to verify depth to bedrock? That would be something that would be contained within this ACCAP 50. We don't have a timeline for when that's going to be updated at this point. Large CAFOs, those I mentioned that are of a size that they need to have a permit from the Department of Natural Resources. These targeted performance standards would be effective through their nutrient management plan. For farms that are not of a size that need to have a permit, the implementation would be at a local level. So implementation for NR 151 comes through the county. And we have, as I mentioned before, in our Chapter 23, we have all of the statewide performance standards and prohibitions in our code, and we implement those. And we work with farms one-on-one to get the cost share that's needed to require compliance and to identify the practices that are necessary to comply with those rules and to make those offer of cost shares and work through that procedure. We receive nutrient management plans and review them. In the same way, we would need to update Chapter 23 to include the targeted performance standards into our county code in order to be able to enforce them. So what I'm trying to say is that we're at a stage now where we have draft targeted performance standards, but there's a ways to go before we're going to see this on the ground. And the timeline, the further out you go, the more unclear it becomes. The one thing that is clear is that our office has for a long time worked with landowners to help them comply with the rules and that are currently in existence, and nothing about that's going to change. So that's what we do, and we are certainly willing to work with individual farms that come into our office. We can provide them with information. We can look at the cropland that they have available to them and try and start answering some questions. Until we know what the actual rule is going to contain, it's difficult to make any further statements other than we can work to assist people. So with that, if people do have questions, I'll be happy to take some now. Otherwise, I mentioned before that my door is always open. Our office has very good staff who are experienced with this. And we're certainly willing to talk with anybody who has questions about it. And with that, I'll open it for any questions you might have right now.
Dave?
How does this apply to, all this time we've been talking about milking cows, right? Substantially. How does this apply to other kinds of animals, llamas, goats, sheep?
So it's mechanical application of manure. So anyone who actively spreads manure, whether it be from any kind of
Doesn't
animal,
matter what the animal is.
this would apply. And I mentioned that rotational grazing or those, that's not included in here. So it's only that mechanical application of manure. And these requirements also do not apply to commercial fertilizer that might be spread on cropland.
Are these smaller, or I'm sure all the larger farms and that stuff are aware of what's going on. Is there an effort to talk to these smaller entities? I know quite a few of them in Door County that would be within less than 24 inches of ground.
We have been speaking with people. People have been stopping in with our office. I know that staff have been mentioning as they've been working in the area, have been discussing with people. Like I said, though, it's tough when you have a draft of a rule. It's we can explain what we know right now, but until we see what the final rule is, we don't have an active, say, a public information meeting scheduled because we don't have the contents of what the final rule would be.
And how does this affect individuals that go to these farms and pick up manure for their own garden activities? You know, that's essentially mechanical application.
That's a good question that I haven't come across yet.
That's all. Thank you.
Susan?
Can we go back to the map? Is that possible, Jill? I have questions about the numbers.
Which, the map?
The map that
Right.
showed soil depth and how much was cropland and how much was... Okay, what I don't understand about the numbers, and maybe it's escaping me, the total land, in the first one, it seems like the total land that's under 24 is 23%, and of that, 18% is cropland. Is that right? Is that how I read that?
Of our cropland acres. So if you were to just take the cropland acres in Door County, 18% of that cropland would have 24 inches or less of soil.
Okay, so in other words, 18% of the 23%?
Of the 100%.
Of the
18% of the...
18%
Add
is
the
going to be
numbers down, you'll see
affected.
that.
Right, they're separate columns.
Okay, thank you.
Steve?
So just a couple comments, and Dave kind of alluded to one about gardens. I mean, I happen to have a garden myself that I know there's less than 24 feet, so, 24 inches of soil. So there are definitely a lot of people that try to get manure on their gardens versus commercial manure. A couple other things, you mentioned it doesn't cover grazing of cattle, and I've had some people contacting me. So what are the rules on grazing of cattle? You can have as many cows as you want in a certain acreage, and they can just continue to eat and poop, and there's no...
What I meant, so two things. One, going back to the gardens, we don't actively have nutrient management plans for gardeners right now, so I can't see that that would change at this point. So I just want to mention that. This would come through a farm operation nutrient management plan, and gardeners don't have that. Related to grazing, what regulations apply to grazing? The statewide regulations do address grazing operations in that we have different performance standards that would apply. So if somebody is truly operating a grazing operation, and we need to look at whether it really is grazing or whether it's a feedlot that somebody says is grazed, because there's a difference in grazing operations. If you stock at a density that's greater than a certain threshold, I believe it's 1 animal unit per acre, but I would need to go back and verify that for sure. If you stock above that threshold, then you do have to have a nutrient management plan, and you have to make sure that you test your soil and meet the phosphorus index and that you have tolerable soil loss. So there's other uniform statewide standards that would apply to grazing operations.
Okay, and so we are managing that now in Door County.
Yes, through our current regulations that we have.
Another question that came up is we have lots of orchards in this county. Is there anything that is watching the amount of spray that's going on orchards, which a lot of orchards tend to have marginal soil. That's why orchards over the years have come to Door County, because soils are marginal, but yet cherry trees will grow in rock. So is there any rules out there?
A couple of points related to that. It depends on what you're spraying. So if you're referring to pesticides and other chemicals that might be sprayed, typically DACCAP is the agency that covers that. It's interesting that you raised that, because we had someone stop in and we were just talking about that recently. So DACCAP, we don't, in soil and water, we deal with manure application. We don't deal, and fertilizer application. We don't deal with commercial pesticides or herbicides.
Okay. I mean, these are just bigger issues that go to our water quality, and so, I mean, people are starting to raise concerns that if we're gonna get after the little farmer, which seems like this is really who it's gonna hurt the most when I look at this. Now, I will say I like, you know, what Joel said, that there is an avenue for these small farmers to hopefully petition and get some adjustment to that 2 feet, but on the flip side, I wonder what it's going to cost the small farmer to go through that process. I mean, that's a whole nother thing, because costs can shut you down right then and there. On that same note, when we were down at the convention, I went to a number of us went to a water meeting. In fact, I think some of these maps I recognized they used. I think the extension put it on. And one thing they talked about was, you know, another thing that there is no regulation. We're hammering the farmers, but they showed a map of developments, and when you have a development in so many acres of property, you have so many septic systems on that development, that can be as damaging to the soil or to the groundwater as so many animals on lands. I mean, it's just another thing for people to think about as population, you know, continues, and we don't regulate the amount of septic systems per acre. I don't think we do, but, you know, I mean, yes, we have zoning and whatnot, but zoning isn't for that, you know, that isn't why we have zoning. So, but anyway, that's just another thing that came up at that meeting that I thought was interesting that we don't often talk about. What else did I have here? Another question was on the well setbacks. Okay, so they're talking about increasing those setbacks. So who comes first, the chicken or the egg? So you got a farm that's been there for 100 years, and the houses start building around the farm and start putting their wells, typically, you know, I mean, putting their wells wherever, but if they put them close to the lot lines, so who wins that battle? So now that new well is put on the neighboring property, so that means you got to be 1,000 feet away from that well. I mean,
So 1,000 feet would be from a municipal well?
or excuse me,
So 250 feet.
250 feet.
So
you know, so who?
Depending on the lot size and where the well is placed, it may not be all that much of an encroachment.
So anyway, that's something I just bring up that's been mentioned to me. You know, if you get, as what's happening in northern Door County, the homes are building around the farms, and if every well is right around there, it just takes away from what's left of that, you know, that farm. And if that so just happens to be the only farmland that actually has 2 feet of soil, there you go. So.
Well, I think the main idea is just to try to get everyone up to speed, but in that case, like, you know, because I actually dealt with that before. I think part of that too is also preservation. So, I mean, part of it you could say that you're fighting against the farm from being able to farm, but my argument back would be is that by doing this, we now have people that have those large tracts of land that have to be smart in trying to subdivide and is trying to make $20,000 on a lot. Because now when that well goes in, it does affect them. So it's a good land use standard too. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects we need to look at this, and there's a lot of different areas. So in some ways, some of these things are actually hopefully going to protect our farmland as well. So I mean, it can be seen both ways. I guess what I'm trying to.
I think partly what I look at, this is something we should have had 25 years ago.
No,
Like now we're at a point where a lot of these farms are small. I mean, the big farms are gone, and so anyway, these are just issues that people have brought up to me that we need to be mindful of and thinking about. I think it would have been nice if, and I don't know the answer of how, but if the small farmers, and I mean the super small farmers, that 2-foot could have been shrunk with a heftier nutrient management plan, or somehow limiting the spreading even more, but allowing it on less than 2 feet. So I guess that's kind of,
Megan?
I have a few questions. First off, thanks for the presentation. I appreciate it. It was well done. One of the things that came up while we were at Wisconsin County Association and in those seminars was actually that contaminated water or manure could show up to, I think it was a quarter mile away in streams. I mean, I guess I was a little surprised that this was just at 250 feet. Has there been any discussion in the way of increasing that further, or?
So the 250 feet is the setback from mechanical application of manure to a conduit to groundwater. And there's other setbacks depending on what the conduit to groundwater is, but wells are a good example. And so the way I understood what you were saying was that the contaminated water shows up a good distance away. And that when we have that underlying geology with the fractures, once it gets into the groundwater, it really can move rapidly in long distances. And so the idea is to keep the manure on the land, in the soil where the intended application is, so the crops can use that nutrients and not allow it to get into the groundwater and then to move.
Okay, so there isn't anything in there in regards to fissures or sinkholes?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Yes, those are what we call conduits to groundwater.
Fissures as well as sinkholes?
There's, yes, sinkholes, there's cracks at the ground, fractured bedrock at the ground surface, there's swallets, so streams that disappear. There's any number of those karst features are identified as conduits to groundwater. There's also a definition that clarifies what a closed depression is. So those areas where you really don't have a feature that's expressed at the surface, but all of the water drains to one point and then infiltrates into the ground.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question was, I was looking at that 2 to 3 foot option that was out there, and there was an option to reduce the pathogen load and therefore spread more heavily. Has there been any discussion about nitrate load?
These standards are intended to address pathogen contamination. And so the rate, I just want to clarify that they wouldn't spread more heavily, but they'd be able to spread in that area, that sensitive area where we know that there's only, say, 2 to 3 feet or 2 to 5 feet of soil. But to address that pathogen issue, if they had treatment to reduce the pathogen load, say, for example, a composting system where the manure could be composted, then that would allow them to be able to spread, say, in that 2 to 3 feet of soil cropland.
So nitrates have not been discussed?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, thanks. And then my final question was, to your knowledge, is there, after this does come to fruition and is put in place, are there going to be follow-up mechanisms to see how it's working and where else it might need to be tweaked moving forward?
That is something that came out very clearly, I thought, in the public hearing. The idea that these are minimum that should be proposed for the targeted performance standards, and DNR, how are you going to be following up and seeing if they're actually doing the job that is intended? So I think that's a good point to continue to raise. this was a compromise that was reached by that technical advisory committee. We have well data from Kewaunee County that shows that there are high levels of contamination in wells that are in areas with more than 5 feet of soil. So I am not aware of what the follow-up mechanism will be. I think that will be important. This is a good first step, and we would need to be able to implement it and then follow up to see how it's working. Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
Laura?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
So there is no rule outside of this one that would be increasing the manure amount spreading. So if we're decreasing it on this amount of soil, there's not a rule somewhere else that says, oh, we can increase more on higher amounts. That's all, this is the same rule.
So this
We're
would
not
be
seeing one or the other.
This would be in addition to the current statewide standards
Right.
that apply everywhere. And one of those standards is that you can only apply manure up to what the crop needs are. So
I didn't want to see something get changed here, but there's a rule elsewhere that's gonna contradict it. Another question that I have is, there was mention on there, treatment to the decreasing the pathogen load. What types of treatments are that?
So the one example that I used was the composting. So
Okay.
if someone employs a composting method, when it's done in the right way, that can reduce the pathogen load that's within the manure.
Okay, so
before
it's not a
spread.
chemical treatment on top of this, or?
No. So not that
Yeah,
I know of.
Well,
say for
bleach or, I'm not sure, kill pathogens. And you just said treatments to decrease pathogen load, so.
Another example for liquid manure would be a digester, where manure is run through a digester and the heat process deals with the pathogen load.
Okay, so with the information you gave today, is there still, or is there any talk about taking the liquid out of the manure itself? Because my understanding, just like you said, there's a heat process to this. And many years ago, the manure that was more solid, that spread, the sun hits it, it's the anaerobics things are getting killed. So now with liquid, the pathogens don't have time to die. It's going right through the bedrock. So is there discussion of that? Is this a step in that direction eventually in the future years?
I think this will help move that conversation forward. So as farms need to look for options for manure spreading, that would be one of the options, is to reduce the volume of the manure that's going out on the landscape. So there are people that are talking about it, but really what these rules lay out are what you can and can't do, and how you get there. That'll be a conversation that will continue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you. Thank you for the time today. I appreciate it.
Okay, before we move back to business, we're going to take a 10-minute recess.
Are you dancing?
Good thing.
Come back at 25-2, please.
Jill's dancing.
Okay, everyone, you ready to get started again?
But Liddy does her own.
This maybe we'll cover it down.
Dan?
Look at,
Roy? Huh? Roy?
you're being
He's going the wrong way.
No, they didn't for me, but they just felt wrong.
because he wants us to.
Yep.
Okay, back in session. Moving right along. Transfer of non-budgeted funds to establish reserves for EMS, Washington Island, Door County simulcast programming, Egg Harbor Tower equipment, and TS storage equipment. Kathy?
I'll make a motion to approve resolution number 2017-65.
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, I can provide just an explanation. So in talking about finance, and actually I know it's been discussed sometimes with admin, we're always looking at our fund balance. And as you're aware from the report, you saw where it was in terms of our existing fund balance. So what we're trying to do is look at projects or things that we know that are either going to be upcoming or are one-time expenses. And we're looking to apply some of those funds towards those projects. So if you look at the recommended allocations, we have $500,000 towards the future EMS project at Washington Island. We're looking at $350,000 towards the simulcast programming that's related to our E911 communications. Another project is the $300,000 for our Egg Harbor Tower project. And with that project, it's for part of our communications. We have some dead spots along Egg Harbor, and this will resolve that issue. Also, it'll address issues also by Cape Point. And the other one is a project that we actually tried to balance as far as our capital expenses for our storage. It says TS, formerly IS, but that's for our storage equipment. So if you look at that, we're looking to allocate $1.25 million. And even with those allocations, the new fund balance would still be at 21.54%. And again, the reason why, I guess in talking with Mark, our recommendation at finance, we feel that 20% is still above our target. So we think these are smart allocations moving forward. And again, depending on where we finish with the project on 14th, there may be additional funds, so we can always look at it. But we think right now this puts us still in a strong financial position, and it allocates it to one-time projects which we know need to be done. If there's any questions, but.
Questions, comments? We'll go to the voter board.
Did he take his thing with him?
I'm trying. There we go.
No, he's voting. He's not here.
He's gone.
He's gone.
I know, but it says he's voting. It's sitting right here. I didn't touch it. I did not touch it. It's right here.
Okay, we might have to cancel the vote and click
Sure
them
you
out
sitting
and
in
come
that
back
chair?
in.
Yeah, he's hiding under the desk.
Ooh, the ghost of
What
Don
did you say to
City.
him, Sue, that you made him leave?
Yeah, where'd he go?
I think it was Nancy.
Oh,
Where the hell did he go?
That's twice now.
He headed to New Orleans.
that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Cancel the vote again, I think.
With the wind, the
Maybe
plane
because
isn't
he
gonna
was
come
No,
out.
it's taking the
logged
train.
in as being here.
Yeah.
Now he has
That's
to be
better.
logged out.
Did he leave?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, if we do it again.
No, he's hiding.
Could never, I didn't miss him.
Hiding under the table.
Just
He
gave us
evidently
the
forgot to sit down in the chair. Oh, no, he's still
The
voting.
money to the
See, when he's not here, you can't defend him.
Washington Island.
I'd take a break, yeah, might as well. Yeah.
Dan?
What did?
And Mr. Burley.
John?
And Mr.
How's
Linus.
that?
Mr. Burley?
I get 2 votes then?
Yeah.
Vote.
What are we
Deja
voting
vu.
for?
The money to,
That has passed 19 yes, 2 absent. Thank you. Resolutions 2017-66, new position request for 2018, increase of hours, reclassification, and new positions.
make a motion to approve resolution 2017-66.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Sure. So I think the biggest thing in this one is we added a column after the joint admin finance committee meeting with the recommendations. So I think those are pretty clear in terms of it. I guess I just want to explain just the one, because I know there was one question by one supervisor, so I just want to explain it. So for the captains, what was the recommendation from admin and finance is that they approve one captain to be recruited as soon as possible, in essence starting January 1st, and that the second captain may be added with approval with the new director and ES committee and admin committee if deemed necessary. So I just want to make sure you guys understand that, how it was approved at the joint meeting.
John?
Well, it says to approve second captain, does it have to be approved by the new director, EMS, and administrative committee? All 3 of them have to approve it? Okay.
Correct.
All 3 of them have to approve it.
That is correct.
But not approved
Right,
by the
all
company.
3 have to sign off on it, correct?
Correct.
So if you agree with this proposal for these positions, it will be put into the budget and approved within the budget. So in the case of the second captain, what would happen is when the new director comes on board, new director says, yes, we want to move forward with that position, it would go to admin and ES Committee and Finance for, or I'm sorry, for ES and Admin for final sign-off. Susan?
I would just like to make a comment. My memory of what our county administrator recommended at that meeting was that both of them be approved. And I guess I really don't see any reason why we can't do that, subject to just when the ES director comes on board, be part of the hiring process. I don't know why we have to keep going back. It's pretty clear that we need this. It's very inexpensive. I mean, we're talking 3.5 cents per thousand. And I think we should just be going ahead with it, period, and not have to keep going back for additional.
Dan?
Well, first is, I don't think it was very clear. It's sort of a compromise this way, that the reason they were put here is because in the budget, it comes under, not under levy limit, but aside it, so that's why it's really put in the budget. So a number of us didn't argue that. And one of the arguments is that you don't hire the assistant coaches until you hire the coach. And so it was thought that we should get a new director on board and listen to the new director's opinion on whether we need all those 3 or all those 2 or all those 1. Once you cross the thing of hiring 2 captains, you can't unring the bell. And we should take our time to make sure it's properly done. And over the last number of years, we've had 4 directors, and each one of them has sort of gone a different direction. And I think we should wait till the director is hired and then make the decision.
Biz?
I think originally at admin, when this was discussed, we thought we'd hire a captain and see how it goes before we hire a second or third one. And give that captain a chance to see, and if he's overwhelmed and there's shifts not covered. I think I stated at the meeting that even if you hired all 3, you're still going to have gaps where people are sick or people are off and there's not a captain on duty. So someone else is going to have to be in charge or get a step-up pay or something else. But I think the original thought was hire one and let's see how it goes, and then later consider hiring the second one if it's really necessary.
So ultimately, the position that was reached by the admin committee was to put the second position in the budget, subject to approval of the new director and a sign off by ES and Emergency Services Committee and admin. Laura?
Yeah, I was going to clarify what you also said, is that it's requesting approval for 2. It's just the process of how
The second one.
that one comes in.
Correct. Linda?
I'm looking at the total numbers on the bottom of page 61. So we have an impact of $667,000. Could someone please explain the offset of $349,000, because looking at the first column, current budget or offset, that does not total up. So if I could have an explanation as to the $339,000 offset, and does the 2018 budget support an additional $317,000?
Okay, so the way we have this allocated, again, the first number, that 666, is just a total of the figures as far as the budget impact. Then what I'm trying to show you is that there is offsetting either revenue or changes in departments with accounts for those expenses. So if you look at, I guess would be the 4th column where it says impact of 2018 budget minus revenues or department changes, that's really a sum of those figures.
Okay.
So in essence, what we're saying is that for the admin assistant, at one time that was dropped down to 24,000, just on how they're looking at staffing it. The captains are still there at that fixed fiscal amount. And you can, again, see the HR generalist, their fiscal impact, and the activities assistant. If you then look below, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 positions where it's been zeroed out. Again, we're seeing direct revenue, which offsets those position costs. So in other words, without the revenue that they're generating, those positions are paying for their salaries. So if we cut the positions, we also got to cut the revenue. For the circulation assistant, that cost is actually money that we're getting from the Village of Egg Harbor once they adopt their budget. So there's zero impact in terms of our county dollars. And then for the admin assistant and technical services, based off all of our reorganization in the department, we have offsetting costs in the department which offset the increase for that. So in other words, in short, we don't have an assistant director, but as part of that change, we're saying that we'd like to make this one full-time, so we have net offsetting costs. In other words, you're not seeing anything directly inserted into the budget. So for your new cost, you're looking at that 317 is being added to the budget. Of that budget, you're adding 255 outside of the levy. So right now, the way the budget's been published, that is included, all those positions are included in the budget as presented.
Anyone else? Joel?
Well, I said I was going to be bringing this up again for discussion at the budget meeting in November, but since it's here before us, I'm going to bring this up again because I think it's a prudent location for the whole board to know this. And I apologize for my hoarseness, but the whole concept of these captains and stuff going on has been going on for a long time, as we all know. But I don't think everybody is fully aware, other than the committees that have been involved, on what has fully transpired and why, and it's kind of gotten convoluted, actually. You know, 2 years ago when Jeff was hired to come on as the interim director, it was his expertise that was brought on to decide and make recommendations going forward. And got a nationally recognized guy who has, as a job, owns a company that comes around and reevaluates services. And he has brought it to our attention that these captains are a vital position to what is recommended for this continuing quality of the EMS service that we have, and that is why it's being recommended. And it's gone back and forth with 1 and 1.5, and then postponing 6 months and all this stuff back and forth. And as the EMS committee chair, and not all the EMS committees here, 2 of them reluctantly are gone, but you know, it's our job and duty to listen to the recommendations from him as the interim director, as the deputy director, and also all of the people that work in that department, and also recommendations that Ken has made through the budget process. And he has stated that he's in favor of the 2 captains position, and there's been reluctancy on should or shouldn't it happen, or what timeline should it happen. And I understand where we're at right now, but the beauty of this system that we have here is, you know, the full county board should be making decisions on this sort of thing, and not just coming from the committees. Those are recommendations and advisements to the full county board, is the way I understand it. So I'm 100% in support that we need these 2 positions, and we need them now. And because of that, I am going to make a motion that we do that right now through this process and get it back on the table for the full county board, and not just the EMS committee, not the finance, and not just the admin. So my recommendation is going to, our motion is going to be to put 2 on here right now, hire them immediately along with the director, and get this ball going as being wanted and discussed by the EMS department. They're basically begging for this. They need this help, this guidance, this supervision, and we're not listening to them. So that's my motion.
I'll second it.
So the motion is to amend the current motion.
Yes.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment? Dan?
I'll reiterate what I just said. When we passed this at administration and finance, it wasn't that we were totally against it. We wanted to get the director on duty to find out if it is necessary. Now, there's a couple different ways this could be done. You could, like I can say about the Sturgeon Bay Fire Department, basically have the same structure, but their person on duty is the lieutenant and works as a shift manager and also lieutenant. They have a captain and a director, chief above them. And one of the arguments that comes out is, well, they don't have time to make the decision to call in extra help. Almost all the time, before they get on the scene, they know if they need extra help and they can make that call. And I think that it's easy to spend money when you, if this was under a levy limit, it's been said by many people, that we wouldn't even be talking about it. If this was the case, we should maybe hire 2 paramedics for Washington Island, 2 paramedics for Egg Harbor, and et cetera. Someplace you got to draw the line on how much you're going to increase the budget. And I think it can be handled with shift lieutenants and one other person in the office. And that's why we went, and I said it once before and I'll say it again, you don't go off and hire your assistant coaches and then hire your coach. We said that we wanted to hire the director first and then take it from there. We're not saying we're totally against it, but we want a director first and see what the new director says.
Susan?
When we're a policy-making board, and we decide what kind of services that we want to have our departments provide. But then we hire department heads and staff to implement those and to let us know when they need resources. And we hire a county administrator to review that with them and to make a recommendation to us. And when most departments, I would almost say all departments, come before us and ask for resources, there is some review of it, but mostly we listen to our county administrator and we listen to our department heads. And the real question we would ask is, can we afford it? Okay, so these two positions would cost 3.5 cents per thousand. That means on a $100,000 home, it's going to cost $3.50. For a $300,000 home, it would cost $10.50. We can afford this. So really, the only question then is, why are we dragging our feet on it? And I think the answer is because for some reason we think we know better than our director, who right now is a consultant with expertise and experience, our deputy director, who spends way more hours than he should be spending on this to try to mop up because there aren't enough bodies to do the supervision, our staff that's asking for it, some of them who have been on our staff for almost 30 years, and they're telling us. And I don't think the county board should be in a position to say to them, you're begging for this, you truly believe this is important. And honestly, I've been at a lot of meetings, and they have explained to us chapter and verse why they need this and what the concerns are if we don't have this. So I don't think the county board should be second-guessing them and saying to our county administrator and to our staff, for $3.50 per thousand, we can't provide this resource to you. I don't want to be in that position. I think we should go forward.
Ken?
It's an impassioned speech, and I give Mr. Gunlickson and Ms. Cohout all the credit for sticking to it. But we've heard this argument 3 times on the various committees. They've been outvoted 3 times, and I can afford a lot of things. But I've got a nickel in my pocket, and the reason I've got that nickel is because I don't spend it just because I can. I don't want to bankrupt my family by buying things. And yes, I understand the argument, but we need, like Dan said, we need a department head that's going to be here, not some outsider telling us what to do. We need a department head that looks the system over and decides yay or nay whether we need these positions. If we get the new department head in and that department head says yes, there probably won't be any debate. We'll do it. But let's hear from the department and get a leader on board first.
Anybody else? Megan?
Just a question, what stage are we in right now in finding and hiring a department head?
We just approved
that hasn't even been posted, correct?
We just approved this morning the recruitment, so we're going to go forward
Right.
with the recruitment, and we actually approved extending the contract with RW Management for the first 3 months or the first quarter, with the goal of trying to have someone on sometime by the end of the first quarter.
Right, so if we would decide to be waiting, we're leaving that department still wanting for at least another 6 months, or possibly up to 6 months, I should say. Is that accurate?
Potentially. It could also be much shorter.
Correct.
Joe?
So as a follow-up to that, since I wasn't at the meeting this morning prior to this, the trigger's been pulled to post for a new director. No director going forward is in their right mind is going to say, no, don't give me some more help. So why not bite the bullet now and let him run side by side and get him going, so when he starts, he's got the people he needs to make his, what he needs right then and there. Nobody's gonna say, no, don't give me another guy to help me run my department. I mean, that's foolish to even think that. So that's where I would take it. That's why they should go together, in my opinion.
Anybody else? Laura?
So, fairly new yet. I'm on the committee for ES. I don't like to spend money. Don't like to go with the levy, but I also come with 5 years of experience working on a rescue squad. I also come with over a decade of experience training and teaching first responders and EMTs in this county. This is needed. And I knew that long before I took this position. And I was I was given the privilege, so I will say that.
Ken?
Just a comment on Joel's. I understand what you're saying, Joel, but there is in economics, law of diminishing returns, where you keep growing and growing and growing until everybody's fumbling over one another, and you get less return out of having more people on staff. I'm not saying that's the case, but to make a blanket statement that any supervisor would want more help is not a factual statement.
Linda?
Just for clarification, again, 2 new captain positions, you have the impact at $256,856. That covers both positions for both positions, full-time, all of 2018, correct?
That is correct.
So the budget, whether you have 1 captain or 2 captains,
Would be
the
in-
bottom line doesn't
Right, the
change.
budget would,
Correct.
positions would be in the budget.
And Supervisor Cohout as to the impact of $3.06 or whatever.
Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the points that the committees heard from the EMS department was that one position would not help their department. It needs at least 2 positions to make it work in the shift schedule. Now, I don't know anything about the shift schedule, but they need at least 2 people, 2 captains to make the shift schedule work. So 1 wouldn't do too much good, but 2 would make it work.
Anybody else? Biz?
I think to have full coverage, so there's no gaps at all, it'd probably have to take 4 captains to do it. On a 24-hour schedule like the sheriff department operated under, 3 of them won't do it because they have vacation time, they have sick leave, and there will be times when there will be no captain there, and someone, I don't know what the EMS committee will do about that when there's not a captain on duty to make a decision when some big event happens. But I can tell you, and I hate to even bring this up, the sheriff department, including the sheriff and employees on the sheriff department, begged for more help in the radio room in the jail for years, and the board said no. And it was necessary. Frank, no one died in the jail. We came very close on, I think, 3 different occasions, but it was put off and put off and put off until it finally, and look today. Today you got a whole 911 center of the communications, and you got a jail with sergeants and all kinds of manpower, and it wasn't that way when I was there. So that's why I was with the belief that if we hired 1 and see how it goes, and see what kind of coverage that we have, that at least for now, eventually it probably is going to happen down the road. But I don't see where we have to jump into it. It's been operating for how many years? And I don't hear any complaints where the system just completely broke down. It moved ahead. Maybe it wasn't perfectly smooth, but it moved ahead.
Linda?
Would these captain positions come from, is this a job that will be posted, or will it be filled from within current staff?
In our discussions, it would be posted, but there would be internal process also for individuals to apply and
So
move
we
up.
do have capable
Correct.
current staff that could fulfill these duties?
Correct.
Dave?
Jesus.
Yeah, well, I guess as Biz alluded to, I mean, over the years, dispatch used to be under the EMS committee. Now that's under the sheriff. All the communications equipment is now under IS. Director of Emergency Services handled that in the past too. So, you know, things have evolved over time so that they're more, their role is more defined. I guess when you look at 2 people managing that department right now, and you offer one position and then take a look in a year for another, I mean, you're going from 2 people to 3 people. That has to make a tremendous difference. I think some of us asked, you know, see how you can work this person into that role, into that department. And, you know, the past year we've been operating with Jeff working as the director, and he's working 3 days a week. You've got a building project in Brussels. You had a building project in Sturgeon Bay here that's taking, I'm sure, a lot of their time. And I see no reason we can't proceed with the recommendation as it was presented.
Steve?
Since we can't go and listen to committee meetings, I guess I'd like to hear our administrator's view and why he believes we need the position.
Ooh, okay, I can do that. Again, I think just to provide some context, if you go back, the initial recommendation was actually for 3. And then when we had that discussion at the committee level, I think we had a joint meeting with both ES and admin, and that's where some of the initial discussion came up on the positions, and they gave some direction back. And at that time, the direction back to me, or what the motion was to approve 1 position, but then there also was the discussion of, I guess, considering a 2nd position at some point in time during that year. I guess my point has been all the way through, I've been supporting the 2 positions, mainly because now I'll be honest, I'm understanding the operations and what they're trying to accomplish. I think the one thing that I said at the last meeting is that I would not support, I would highly not recommend doing 1 and then doing 1 like 3 or 4 months later. It totally affects on how we're recruiting for the positions, and I'll tell you exactly why. If we do 1, I guess my thing is I'd actually go back to what David has said. If we're going to do 1, let's just do 1 and then go through the budget process for 2019 and see if we're going to add another. The reason why is because it affects how we recruit. If we're just going to do 1 position, you're not going to put them on a 24-hour shift. You're going to put them on a shift similar to Aaron. Maybe you'll stagger it. You know, Aaron he does a lot more, but let's say 8 to 4:30, maybe this person would do noon to whatever. But if you do 1, you're not going to have that person do a 24-hour shift. If we do 2 positions, we are going to go to a 24-hour shift. So in other words, you're going to have them rotating off. I think it's a 48-96 schedule. So in other words, they're going to work 48-hour shifts, and then they're off 96. And the most logical thought originally with the 3 was to have that staggered through, but you do have some potential dates where it's not covered. But with the 2, what they were looking at is having the 2 run the 48-96 shifts, and then you probably have your assistant director possibly shift to that, so you'd still have that coverage. So long story short, my recommendation is really twofold. 1, if we're going to do 1, stick with the 1. If you're going to do 2, do the 2. That way we know what we're recruiting, because I don't think it's fair to have someone come on and say, okay, we're going to hire you as this position, professional hours, but then we're going to shift it in 3 months or 6 months and say, no, we're going to have you do a 48-hour shift. It's just not right for them, for their family situation, all that type of thing. But again, I guess my recommendation was what I recommended was still the 2 captain positions. If you look at the memo that I included, I know there was some sentiment in terms of, you know, having a director in place first. And I actually had that as a recommendation that you could do the recruitment and postpone bringing them on. We've waited 6 months now. And then you could have that director come on board and have them be part of that process for recruiting. So again, I was trying to find some balance to where we could build some momentum and support for it. But my position has always been that we at least need the 2 positions. Whether we start them now or whether we start them in June, I'm still going to say you need the 2 positions.
Dan?
In Sturgeon Bay, are they on the 48, 96, or are they on 24, 48?
They are, right now, they can't because we don't have the space in the existing facility, but once we move to the new headquarters, that is the intended schedule.
So So just to clarify then, you favor two, but if we're just gonna do one, it should just be one for the whole year.
Correct.
So what's in here is not what you would prefer, the way it's written, that we consider the second one within the year.
No, again, if you're just gonna, my opinion would be if you're just gonna do the one, you just hire the one person, you recruit it, so that way we know exactly what that person's gonna work for hours and shift. And then that's the way you can surely test whether or not it's gonna work. Because if you just hire someone, let's say for 3 months, and you say, okay, we're gonna bring them on for a 20-hour shift, I can guarantee that's gonna fail. If you're gonna bring someone on in terms of having them work the, I guess the shift opposite of Aaron, you're gonna have to really flush that out. And you, to be honest, if you're really gonna see if it's gonna work, you're gonna have to give it some time and flush that out and actually understand it. So I agree with Supervisor Engel, what you said. Either we do the one and we analyze it for 2019, or we do the two up front and we move forward.
Let me just clarify, John's up next. What's not been discussed in this little discussion right here was the admin committee all along has been saying, put the director in place and let the director make the final decision. Okay. So, John?
Well, I just want to say that I haven't had anybody come up to me and say, our emergency services system is terrible, it's not working, do something, Ninus. Nobody's approached me with that statement. Sometimes I hear it the other way. How many ambulances do you need? But nobody has told me it's not working, do something. Nobody.
Well, if I could respond, and maybe Jeff can step in, but I can tell you that, well, I'm just going to say it. I think there's a strong chance that if we don't do something to help Aaron out, we'll lose him. And if you're willing to take that chance with those positions, then that's what we'll do, but we'll cycle through them. So maybe it's part of our fault at the ES committee of not stressing that and bringing it up through, but I can tell you right now, that's the number of hours that you have your assistant director working. And even with a director coming on board, with those two people being responsible for 24-hour calls, you're burning them out. Now, can that be fixed with one or two? That's what you're here to decide today. My thing is I'm telling you need two, but if, like I said, if you're going to do one, do the one and test it. That's fine. I'm fine with that. But I'm telling you right now that they're being burnt out, and we're very lucky to have an individual that has been willing to dedicate the hours and time to do that. But I guess I'm also advising you that there's your warning, that if we don't do something, you're not going to keep those two individuals in those positions.
Laura?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't think that's ever been wanting the committee to, I don't think we ever as a committee wanted to come forward to make threats of that, is that it's going to fall apart if we don't do this, et cetera. I think there's a standard that if there's 2 counties in the state that have this operation, then we should do it correctly. And also there comes liabilities with that. And supervision is part of that.
Joel?
Well, 2 comments in regards to John about not hearing it. The public doesn't complain about it because when they call 911, they get an ambulance. They're not the one that aren't saying anything. It's the people that are doing the job that are saying something, and we're not listening to them. So that's why you don't hear it. I don't hear it either from the Joe Blow public that calls 911. They just care they get an ambulance and get to the hospital. That's all they give a rip about. But also, to clarify what was talked about at the joint meeting last week, it was to fast track and get a director hired, or start that process, and 1 new captain. And then once the director came on board, to let him say yes, or he or she say yes or no, and make a recommendation as to the second one. That's great. That's been proved along, and that's the way it will go in the worst case scenario. I'm saying today, right now, I want to fast track that, and let's do both captains at the same time that we're doing with the director, and get it all going, the whole package right now. That's what they're saying. And that's the beauty of this process. I was able to bring that forward regardless of what the committee thought. You don't like it, that's the way it is. So that's why I'm getting aggravated, and we're gonna talk about it for the full county board, and not just a couple committees that are what we think. It's not we, it's the county board.
Kathy?
Do the parties that have been speaking about the 1 compared to 2, do they seriously think that someone in their right mind is going to maybe apply for that directorship with what's going on? I would worry about that. That they, that they don't know, and we're not following recommendations that were made by the individual people that do have the expertise and know what they're talking about. And that's the ones that we should be listening to.
Susan?
One other piece, as we listen to evidence from the staff, and we heard from Chris Hecht, who's, I think, 26 years is what he has worked in our service. And what we hear is that these people, these captains, yes, they will be shift supervisors, so they will be looking at the big picture, and if there are calls that have put machines and crews in different places, they will watch to see when they should be relocated so that we will keep our county covered and don't have to go to Algoma or somewhere that's a very long time to get to wherever it has to get to. So there's that piece. But there's the other piece that we're struggling getting all our training done, which is usually done at night, as was explained to us. We're having trouble keeping up with our emergency management tasks and our various studies. So these are all things that these captains will assist our director and our deputy director to do, as well as being able to make the decisions for our crews that our crews shouldn't have to make. That's really above their pay grade. But they're being put in a position where they have to make decisions while they're tending a patient. So there is work for these captains to be done, and it has a place in the overall way emergency services departments ought to work. So I agree with Joel.
Anybody else? Dan?
I don't
Then
quite
we're gonna close the
understand.
discussion, we're going to go to the amendment vote.
I don't quite understand why two will work. They got three different shifts, so one shift's going to be vacant of a captain. No matter,
48 to 96.
Am I correct?
Amend my motion for 3 then? 'Cause I will.
Well, the question is, yeah, I suppose, if you're going to
No,
go.
because I conceded that, we talked about, the recommendation came forward that
Wait a second.
the director and the assistant director could fill that third spot to save the third position. That's why.
What'll happen though, Joel, and I can give an example, when we hired the director, and we didn't have a director that was run by shift people, they were gonna take the overtime, and all of a sudden that went by the wayside. Then we hired an assistant director, and they were gonna do the overtime, and that sort of went by the wayside. And now, other people take those positions. So to say that the director and the assistant director are going to pick up the time that the captain isn't there. And then I have a question, if most of the work of the captain is paperwork and education and et cetera, how are you going to do that the 12 hours a day that basically, I hate to say this, watching TV and sleeping? How are they going to do all that stuff then? And they're going to be on for 48 hours. I'm contending that, yes, we need a person as a captain, but it should be in the office so they can do the things that they got to do. And maybe we need 2 of them. But to put them on a shift, I just don't understand what they're going to do on 50% of their shift time.
Okay, I think we're getting beyond the discussion. So let's call for the question, bring the amendment to a vote. Can you reiterate the amendment?
Well, I would have asked for Supervisor Gomez.
Okay. Joel, can you reiterate the amendment?
The amendment, a motion to hire 2 new captains simultaneously with the director position, so all 3 come on board relatively as close as possible, and not wait to stagger them until after one is hired and get a recommendation or something to that effect.
So we're waiting for the director to be hired.
So we're not waiting for the director to be hired.
Oh, so I thought that's what, I'm sorry.
So the first,
So your amendment is to proceed forward with the 2 captain positions January 1st.
Yes.
When the budget goes into effect.
Yep.
Irrespective of whether the department director is in place or not.
Correct, with the intent, with the hopes that it will be though.
But I understand.
Yes, but yes, yes. Perfect.
What's in before us is the 2 positions.
Yes, 2 positions.
Okay. So a yes vote would be to put the 2 captain positions in place effective January 1st as soon as possible thereafter. Okay?
Right.
That would be the amendment that we're voting on that. go to the voter board.
What does it say up there? How could it be absent? It's not fair.
Okay, so the
I
vote
have a
has,
quick-
the vote has, what?
I have an
Something's wrong on
objection.
it.
I have an objection. I didn't get a chance to vote.
You talk too much.
You're absent.
Yeah.
I might be absent, but
Might be mental.
that could be.
No, it'll be 7.
Okay, we're gonna redo it.
Here's your chance to change your vote.
Not.
What are we doing?
Revoting.
Revoting.
Mr. Chairman, can you reiterate what happened so that some of us understand what's going to happen next?
What happened was somehow Dan got left out of the vote.
So if it's not on the screen, you can't be touching your clickers. Because if you do, you're gonna
Be
knock
absent?
yourself out of the meeting. Okay?
It was in
So when
such
it
a
goes
hurry.
up there, you can vote.
So we're gonna re-vote on the amendment. So a yes vote would be to
To go
support
for 2.
the 2 January 1st. Are we ready?
You're right.
We're ready, okay.
No, we are. Come on. Everybody was a 1. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, the amendment is passed, 12 yes, 7 no. Okay. So now we need to vote on the resolution of the position, I'm sorry, the positions as amended, with the amendment being that 2 captain positions would be put in place effective with the budget on January 1st. Say that correctly? Any discussion? Voter board, please.
No on this one.
That has passed 14 yes, 5 no.
Oh, they got their way.
Next. Resolution 2017-67, part-time pay rates, replacing Resolution 2016-65 and 2016-66.
Motion to approve.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Sure, this one I can explain pretty quick. This is something you guys take action on every year. And what we're trying to do to make it more transparent is we have all the positions that are always considered. You know, in the previous years, we just bring ones that are changing, but we're actually doing it on one sheet, so we always track it year to year. So if you look at the back, or page 63 of your packet, you can see what the current rates are. Then you'll see proposed rate and then the recommendation. So again, you look at the proposed rate, you're looking at actually 5 changes. On those 5 changes, the ones are under airport and parks, and the other one is for the circuit court under the bailiff. Otherwise, the other ones will remain the same.
Questions? Dave?
Underneath airport and parks, the seasonal class for CDL required, that didn't change. Did the change occur that the CDL is being removed? Mine says 14 to 14.
No, that one did remain the same. I guess this is an oversight. Will be consistent. It didn't change, but we're recommending that stay the same. Sorry.
Anybody else? If not, we'll go to the voter board. That has passed 19 yes, 2 absent. Next resolution, 2017-68, in opposition to the proposed SB 395 and AB 499 relating to the regulation of non-ferrous metallic mining. Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion, we adopt Resolution 2017-68.
Second.
And what we are against, I think Greg is in the background, that he can explain it better than I can, but basically, we're against the state reducing or totally doing away with the regulations on non-ferrous metallic mining.
Thank you. Yeah, basically, this is, again, some very fast-moving legislation. There's a lot of environmental protections in this, in SB 395 and AB 499. A lot of the environmental protections are being removed, as you probably heard back in July when we had the resolution opposing the Back 40 mine in Michigan. Basically, the Prove It First prohibition for permitting one of these metallic mines in the state is being removed. The prohibition for high-capacity well withdrawal or pumping that may have a detriment to the waters of the state or an individual is being removed. There's a new term in there called bulk sampling, which is equivalent to 100,000 tons or 10,000 tons, which is about the equivalent of 500 dump truck loads. It removes some of the hearings, the public comments, the DNR oversight, and basically, again, the provisions to protect the environment are being removed, and this is being fast-tracked. So I guess that's kind of the summary of it.
Questions? Right. Greg. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right. New business, supervisor compensation and reimbursement. I'll start the conversation. I kind of kicked the hornet's nest on this one. We have, we actually have two things before us to consider, and I'd like to handle them separately. The first part of it is there's some amendments to our bylaws in here, or changes to bylaws that we've had discussions on for several months, both here and in the various committees. So I'd like to go through that first. And the second was an alternative to our per diem or compensation rates. Okay? I asked Ken originally a couple months ago to look at the salary side and look at putting something together. And so we'll discuss that next. But what I want to do is go through the individual changes if we kept our compensation plan or system the same. Okay? So in your packet, starting on page 67, you've got the draft of the changes. So they take effect April 17th, after the election. Item number 1, per diem and expenses. Item number C, requests for payments should not be submitted and payment will not be authorized unless the requester has attended at least 30 minutes of the meeting. That was something we had discussed. The per diem rate, moving on down to compensation, per diem rate of $200 for county board meeting that he or she actually attends. Number 2 was $50 plus an hourly rate of $25 for each hour above 2 hours, up to $200 per day, so the two per diems match. So that removes the $50 for the first hour, now becomes $50 for the first 2 hours. Okay, that makes sense? On the next page, 68, if you would recall this year through the budget process, we took the meetings and conferences and we put them into the individual committee budgets. So that necessitated this change. Basically it says workshop provided funds have been appropriated for their attendance. So that would be in the budget. So when we approve the budget this year, each committee will have dollars in their budget for their approved conferences that they submitted. Okay? If during the year they exceed that budget is gone and there's new conferences or other meetings that they want to attend, okay, there's a mechanism to allow that to happen. That committee would have to come to the admin committee and finance committee and ask to attend beyond what was currently budgeted. So this is how we do it with anything else. If it's not budgeted and it's passed, you expended the funds, you're going to need to come to admin and finance to get the funding and approval for it. Dave?
And you are intended it to be both committees, so.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So it could be reviewed. Item number 5, same page, supervisor may only receive compensation under 4A1, not allowed pay on days that county board meets. So again, we looked at being able to pay for additional committee meetings on county board days. Under the statutes, that's not possible. So it remains, if you do anything on the county board day, in addition to county board, still no additional compensation for that. Dave?
And what 4A1 and 4A1, 2, or 3?
It should be 2A1.
2A1?
Yeah, there's a,
Okay.
and actually, there is no 2A, it's 2E, that should be 2A.
And that's one of the other things I highlighted. Should E actually be A?
Okay, next page. We had requests and discussion about the mileage reimbursement, so it'll be calculated from the supervisor's residence or their work location within Door County. If a supervisor's work location is outside of Door County, mileage reimbursement will be calculated from the county line.
And just a comment, I did not push for that last sentence. I had nothing to do with it. It showed up on its own.
Okay,
Let's make this start.
I think that was it. Does that make sense so far? Did I miss anything? Okay. Joe?
I have one question, and I just caught it now, actually, after reading this thing 500 times. On page 69 of our packet on the screen, where it's talking about, and it pertains to me, obviously, is why I caught it. On a supervisor resigning from Washington Island, I know we talked about this, it was either last year or the year before, about the lodging when somebody has to come down for overnight. Somehow unless it was put in there, the up to $60 a night is added again, whereas last year's in the book, it was at the going rate was the term. There's not a hotel in Sturgeon Bay for $60 a night.
No.
Right.
So,
That may have just stuck in.
Yeah.
it must, I just happened to catch it again.
They've come up with
I'll keep my car if you want.
$60.
I don't even give rates that cheap.
You have to submit a bill for $60, though.
We'll certainly make, we'll certainly make that change.
Yeah, it must have been in the software still or something.
All right, so if, Roy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 67, section 2, item E, Wisconsin Counties Association Annual Conference and Wisconsin's Annual Legislative Exchange or biennial Kiwanee legislative days, does that money come out of the individual committee's budget or is it out of another budget?
County board.
County board.
That county board budget, so that's budgeted for that, okay.
Okay. Linda?
On page 68, Roman numeral number 3, paragraph A1, mileage rate as established by the county board. Why don't we just say as established by the IRS, or does our county code say IRS rates?
I think it's the IRS.
Usually it's what we establish, but
Just for ease of administration, I think the reason that's in there is that elected and appointed officials and county employees be reimbursed at the same rate.
Right.
I believe it is IRS rate. I don't know if Mark's still back there.
yes, it is.
Okay, good.
Steve?
Well, I guess I'll start the discussion.
Oh, go ahead.
So, I've been very happy with the way the per diems have been for the committee meetings this year. I spend an hour traveling down here, an hour traveling back during the day for maybe an hour meeting, sometimes a 2-hour meeting. And I lose my overtime, which, I mean, I'll put it out there, $23 an hour overtime I lose. And to get paid for a loss of 3 hours to be paid $25 is not right. And I've talked to numerous people because it bothers me to have to bring it up. But if you want to have people run for these offices, you have to pay fair wages to them, just like we talk about paying fair wages to employees in this county. You can't expect people to take that much money out of their pocket to do these jobs. And I know it's come out about, well, you're doing it as a civic duty, it's you're doing it because you want to do it. Well, I do it because I want to do it, but I'm not counting the amount of hours I spend not doing my homework away from family time. That's not covered either. And I figure I spend at least an hour going through every committee packet. Sometimes they're more, like property, the last year here has been more. But all that time is not compensated for, but I would just like to be compensated for my time. And I had one constituent say to me, well, why don't, if the people that live right around, or the supervisors that live right around Sturgeon Bay that don't feel right about taking $50 an hour, then do something that the districts within a certain distance, they only get $25 an hour, and the ones that have to travel farther get $50 an hour. If that's the, you know, the stigma about it, that some of you feel bad that you're taking $50 an hour and you live within 10 minutes of, you know, of the building. But I just don't think it's not right for us that have to travel from outside areas.
Okay, so just let me clarify. What you're specifically referring to is what we used to call the Fisher Rule?
Correct.
So instead of $50 for the first hour, okay,
Only for 2 years.
and bumping that down to the 25, that's what you're referring to. So you would like, your proposal, what you're asking is to keep it the same?
Correct. What we've been doing, I think, is fair. I mean, the $200 per county board, I don't know how everybody feels about that. I wasn't asking for that. I think $150 is reasonable, but I don't think that should be a replacement for taking away the committee, which is where all the work is done. I mean, that is truly where everybody puts their time in, is in these committees.
Dan?
If we were going to pass that heavy amendment, then it would then be called the Sones Rule?
I was just going to say, we might have a Sones Rule.
Change the name.
No. I thought reaffirmation of the Fisher Rule.
I thought the mileage thing would be the zones.
Yeah.
So we can still keep the 50.
And I appreciate that, the discussion and the change in the mileage, because I think that is a fair thing, and I think you came up with a way to accommodate people that are, you know, working outside the county. And
Dave?
Well, I agree with Mr. Solons. I think this is a cut and pay for many of us, especially those of us that are traveling a distance to come to meetings. I think the payment for the committee meetings that we're attending is really our work. And, you know, I think there's, if you want to cut some money someplace, attendance at WCA or something like that doesn't have to be at that $200 an hour level. I may have disagreement there, but I look at this as 12 committee meetings a year. That if you're losing $25 in pay on that, that's the equivalent of $200 over at the convention or something, or $600 for 3 days, I should say. You know,
Linda?
Any?
I'm sorry?
No, that's fine.
I'm sorry, but I have to disagree with that analogy. You chose, like me, I chose to be on the county board. Fortunately, my constituents voted for me. And I believe we need uniformity. You can't be drawing circles on a map saying you were going to get 25, you're going to get 50. Nor should you expect the taxpayers to compensate you at your going normal rate because you choose to be on the county board. Mr. Sohn said that it's part of our civic duty, and I totally agree. I was in the workforce for 50-plus years. I made the decision and had the desire to do my public service. With an $86 million budget, that's not saying that we're not doing important things, you know, because we are in charge of $86 million for the county's expenses and revenues and all that. Anyway, I believe $150 is adequate. I actually went back for the last 12 months and I added up the number of hours that we were either in session in this room, including a couple tours and including a retreat, and I came up with 25 hours. Now, you can double or triple that for prep time, depending on your personal preference. How much effort do you want to put in to your job as a county board supervisor? That's up to you. But I don't think you, I'm not in this for the money, obviously. Not to say that we can't be compensated in some way. I also believe that there should be a rotation set up for either attendance at the WCA conference. So committees or whatever nominate a delegate. Okay, this year you're going and you're going to attend that session and you're going to report back to the rest of the committee. Like I said, I think a rotation basis for attendance at conferences and training, be it for the highway committee, for county board members in general. I mean, if we're looking at watching our pennies, I think we should set the example. So that's my point of view.
Steve?
And one other thing that Linda kind of reminded me of, one of the people I talked to in the last couple days also mentioned it's not only, I mean, first off, if you want to have younger people and you want to have people that might have jobs that they have employers that would allow you to go, in my case, I'm kind of both. It's not only the 3 hours that I come down here for, you know, if this goes through $25, it's also I have to hire somebody to replace me or I lose business because I'm not there. So there's more to it, and I never even thought about that part of it, but, you know, anybody that has a business, the business also struggles on top of that. So it's just another thing, Dave. I mean, I'm sure if you thought about it, you know, I mean, how much time you're away? Do you have to hire an extra employee because you're not?
I have to bring somebody in when I'm not there.
Yep. So, I mean, there's a lot to this for people that aren't retired, you know, that have the time. So.
Anything else? Susan?
My objection is to the $200 per diem for county board. If you saw the handout that was circulating, which was a 2-page handout that referenced a survey done of all the counties, and there were 60 of them that responded, Door County is paid the most for its per diem for county board. Polk County and Kewaunee are the next highest, and they are 100. So I don't think there's any justification for giving ourselves a 30% raise, just because we can.
I agree with Susie, and considering what we've done to our employees with all the wage studies and everything, if we're going to take a raise, it should be within market, and I don't think it is. I think we'd be very out of market. We're already out of market, so we should be staying level.
Anybody else? Okay, so I'll try and reiterate. I might ask for a show of hands. These are all drafts. These would go back to the admin committee to come back with a finalized for the next county board when we would need to approve it one way or another. So how many would like to see the
Just go to the beginning, go through.
Yeah. Let me get my first page again. I'm getting it. Okay, so let's just go through them one by one. Under number 1, per diem and expenses, item C, you have to be at a meeting at least 30 minutes to get paid.
I actually thought you had to be at least half of it.
Used to be.
It used to be half. This is the change, at least 30 minutes.
Because you don't know how long it's going to go.
Right. If a daily per diem rate of $200 for county board meeting he or she actually attends. How many want to keep it at the proposed 200? Back to 150? Item number 2 would be
That'd have to match, wouldn't it, Grant?
Yeah,
They have to match. Those two have to match.
What?
The 150 and the 200 have to match. These two numbers have to match.
Okay, so wait a minute. Can you explain that? What can I say?
By statute, the per diem for county board day is the max compensation that a supervisor can receive for attendance at committee meetings.
Wait a minute, that's not right.
Say that
We've
again.
been doing it different for years.
We've been doing it wrong apparently for years.
Sorry, for committee meetings or for conference?
Compensation.
No, let me grab the statute.
Oh, we have to give a bunch of money back.
For conference?
Yes, everything.
For anything? Yeah, wasn't it 225?
We come, settle every section.
Yeah, if you read it, yeah, we've been doing it wrong for years.
That means we should get
It
225.
used to be $200 for county board meetings.
225.
I gotta leave in about 5
Too many
minutes.
people.
There's one more boat going home today, and I'm not gonna miss it.
So you're gonna be peddling here.
I don't have all the statutes here, but that is a statutory.
So what, okay, so just clarify what you're trying to say, Grant, that if we set the compensation for county board at 150,
Then the max.
the maximum any one day for committee meetings
Is
would also be 150?
Yes.
So it wouldn't be the 200 or 225 we've been at?
Everybody's been breaking that rule forever.
We weren't breaking that rule originally. It used
really.
to be $200 for a county board day and $25 an hour for up to 8 hours for $200. That's where we came by that.
Yeah, I don't think we,
That's what it used to be. And then when Charlie Moles was chairman, we reduced that. When we reduced it, you can say no, Susie, but you're wrong. We reduced it because we went from $25 to $15 for conferences and out of town. And then when we did that, we reduced it to $150 for the county board meeting also.
Linda?
I believe the reference is 59.10, Grant. It's on page 75 of our packet. It's 59.10, paragraph, let's see, section 4, subparagraph I, alternative compensation.
And then Jay.
I'm sorry, H, except for services as a member of a
Right.
committee. Okay.
okay. Linda found it.
Good job,
But
Linda.
the limitation on compensation, except for services as a member on a committee is provided in 59.13, no supervisor shall be paid for more days attendance on a board, da-da-da. No, wait, that's not it.
Except for committee meetings, I believe it.
Yeah, except for committee meetings.
If it says more
Except
days
for
advance.
services
Right.
as a member of a committee, you can't be paid more than $150. So anything that doesn't include committee meetings, correct? Committee meetings would be the exception.
So you could get more than 100.
No, there's.
No,
there-
H
there-
doesn't work either.
There's another section, I think it's 59.13, which I just don't have with me. Or maybe I do.
Linda, it says for more days.
Well, how about this, just
One
for,
day, right.
just because we needed to research this for right now, why don't we say that we will research that portion of the $200 cap? So we'll check that and get that clarified for admin. I think the other part you need to clarify for that is the $50 for the first hour or not.
Right.
So you need to take a vote on that advisory vote.
Okay, so as an advisory vote, who would like to keep the $50 for the first hour as it currently is?
Or fraction thereof.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a majority, clear majority.
The Sones rule.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Continuation of the Fisher rule.
For those of you that weren't here last term, when this was done, I've sat patiently, pretty much, for 2 years, having this thrown in my face as a Fisher rule. And what I said, I don't care. My intent was to make it worthwhile for anybody coming from outside the area, Steve. that you'd get $50. If it was a 1-hour meeting, you would get $50 for that first hour, okay? And that was my thought, that's why I wanted that change, because it wasn't fair to anybody, and for any of us taking time out. And it was supposed to be $50 for the first 2 hours was my intent. So if you had a 1-hour meeting, you'd still get paid the $50. Okay? It got recorded down as $50 for the first hour, 25 after that. Now I'm
Which is the way it was
editorializing.
voted on.
Now everybody voted that was good. I want to go on record as saying I don't want to be ridiculed anymore like I have been the last 2+ years, because you guys are now adopting that, and I don't want it to be termed the Fisher rule, okay?
I'm not ridiculing you, I think that's a good rule.
I think it is too,
So
but I had to sit here patiently for 2 years, now it's
I
done.
mean, even though it isn't exactly
So
what
Ken.
you planned.
But it's a good, yeah.
It's a good.
All right.
Still be
All right.
ridiculed.
Oh, yeah.
So it went from a negative to a positive. I think we should still call it the Fisher rule.
All hail the Fisher.
I would prefer you don't.
5913, and I have it with me,
Which means what?
which means that under 5913, which is the paradigm we're operating under for the per diem for committees, sub 2 says that committee members shall receive such compensation for their services as the board allows, not exceeding the per diem and mileage allowed to members of the board, and the committee members shall receive such compensation. So the amount we allow for the county board meetings per diem is a maximum that a individual supervisor can receive per day.
Excluding mileage.
Well, excluding mileage, yeah.
Could you read that one more time, Grant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's different than.
Ready? Committee members shall receive such compensation for their services as the board allows, not exceeding the per diem and mileage allowed to members of the board. And that's talking about committee compensation.
Right, nowhere does it say your per diem for committee meetings has to be the same as your per diem for the county board meeting. It just says if you decide to have a per diem of $25 an hour up to 8 hours, that is fine. That is fine. If you say your per diem for county board is $150, that per diem is fine also. It doesn't designate or differentiate between the two.
Now, if you.
Not from what you said, it doesn't.
Right. We could put this in, it actually, it sets it as a ceiling. Because in 5913, it speaks solely to committee compensation, and the county board can set the compensation for services for committees, but it goes on to say not exceeding the per diem and mileage allowed to members of the board.
For what?
But we never, the only allowances we make is specifically county board
Right.
or 2 other things. We never reference standing committee wages.
Right, so if your per diem for the meetings is $25 an hour, and we have meetings that last
15 hours.
longer.
RPC.
Yes, and you have a couple of meetings a day, and you run up to that 8 hours a day. You can get paid $25 or 50 plus 25 for the first 8. That's what we set. What Grant's alluding to, I contend, is, well, we can't just arbitrarily say, you know what, we went 2 hours longer, let's make it $300 a day. We can't do that.
Or a statement where our regulations say that all committee members will get paid no more than 8 hours for every committee. That'd be the equivalent.
Same thing. Yep. You can't have 9 hours in and say, well, now we're gonna take an extra hour. You cannot do that.
Right.
But the 2 days can be different from what, that's what I'm contending. The 2 can be different from what Grant is reading now.
So I would request that Grant have go through and review this a little bit further and get a better way to explain to us what he thinks it's intended to mean.
Right. I think you're both saying the same thing. I think it's just more saying it's the cap. So, right, what Ken's saying is that the compensation we can set as that rate, the 25, the 50, 25. But once you hit that cap of whether it's 150 or 200, that's the cap for that day.
But yeah.
No, if we say it's
What I'm
200,
saying,
if we say it's 8 hours
that's not what he said.
for 225, that's what it is. If we say county board meetings are 150,
Okay.
that's what it is.
Okay, I see
Right.
what you're saying, right, yep. We'll
We
check,
don't, we
we'll
don't set a
research that.
cap for a meeting.
No.
Right,
a
we will
meeting.
confirm that.
Okay, we'll get that clarified. Susan?
I would refer to Jill. I didn't make up the 200 as not being something we did, but I recall, don't hide. But I recall that when this came up last time, Lori Holz, I think, researched it because it was being discussed that the county board had been paid 200, and she found that it was never on record at 200. It had never gone above 150. So I didn't make that up, Ken.
That's wrong.
That's wrong. It was 200.
200 at one time.
Yes.
So as much as she could find, and this was researched at the time that we were talking about compensation plans for our employees, she went back to 1987, it was $75. That looks like it changed in 95 to 125, and then in 99 to 150, and it's remained at that. Your committee meetings are different than that, but county board per diems, that's what she found. It's a little hard to track, so maybe there was something in there. We'd have to actually then go through every November meeting, because you did not change your per diems by resolution for county board up until more recent.
Dan?
I remember that, I think it was Tom Olson that made the motion to go from $200 to 150. I can't give you the date or the time, but I at least know the person.
Okay, Steve?
I just want to clarify one thing too on the Fisher rule.
No more.
Positive Fisher. That also has the 1250 in it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
for
so
the
it's
half
the
hour.
same as what we did. Just wanted to verify.
Okay, next. Yes. Next on page 68, we're talking about the funds have been appropriated into the budget. If you exceed the appropriated funds within your committee for conferences or other meetings that you want to go to, you'd have to come back through admin and finance. Item number 5, supervisor may only receive compensation allowed, can receive no additional compensation on days that county board meets. Okay. See, Grant got me turned around.
Oh, I didn't see, I didn't look.
The mileage reimbursement calculation changed from either your workplace, from place of work, or from the residence. If you're outside the county, start calculating from the county line.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I guess regarding that one, I guess I somewhat see the reason for the county line, but for any of us living in Southern Door, we do work across that line sometimes. And we're no farther away than you are from Northern Door to Sturgeon Bay. I guess why the exception?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last.
I says, why the exception for the county line? I guess people in Southern Door do work south if you're going to apply that rule.
Well, I guess in this context, a little bit of the discussion was, okay, so what if a supervisor happens to be in Madison for a conference and now they're driving back from Madison to attend a meeting? Does that, the fact that they're driving home but coming to a meeting, do you want to give them the mileage?
I understand, Ken, but I guess then I know the request was made by Mr. Sones for an area in the county, but it's it's not treating people fairly if you're working 5 miles south of the line.
There is an individual who consistently works well south of the county line.
David, who's that?
And that one never, ever pushed for any part of this. And by the way, he doesn't consistently do that anymore.
He doesn't work consistently.
I agree with David, though. I mean, just because your choice position happens to be 5 miles outside of the county, your daily working location.
Yeah. Okay, so if I take a job in Manitowoc, and I drive there every day, and I decide to leave from work from Manitowoc to Sturgeon Bay, I get paid for that every day I have a meeting.
Well, then we should leave it the way it is.
Well, the idea was to try and provide some relief for somebody who does have to work consistently farther away from their house, but still has to come to meetings on a day when they're far away. Dan?
Well, I think we're really, you guys are using Manawak and Green Bay, but when Leo was in Florida, he came home a number of times, and if the way some people wanted, are we going to pay for Leo's mileage from Florida here? You know, that's an example, extreme, but it's not as extreme as you think, because there are a number of people that aren't here in the wintertime, and they got free mileage home, I'm sure they would take it.
So, keep the change?
Show of hands.
Show of hands, keep the change?
From workplace or county line?
Correct.
Yes.
Or home?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, it's majority.
That's it.
Thank you.
It? Okay, that's it for that.
You do understand that's a zones rule, right?
Happy to own that one.
Yep, I'll take it.
Okay.
It's a start, it's a start.
Okay, the second part of this was there's always been a lot of discussion over the years. Every month there's discussion about the reimbursements, the forms, what you get paid for, what you don't get paid for. There was discussion about going to salaries. A couple of months ago, I asked Ken to put together kind of a budget-neutral salary proposal. The idea behind it was if you took everything that the county board was now spending on per diems and committee meetings and everything else, and our monthlies, and divided that equally among the 21 supervisors, what would you come up with? And what he came up with was
72.
the
65.
the $6,500. So $6,500 would be the amount that would keep it pretty much budget neutral, wouldn't add to the budget, decrease in the budget, what was currently being spent if everybody went to a salary. Okay? So if you went to a salary, some of the caveats of it is you wouldn't be paid for committee meetings, you wouldn't be paid to go to conferences, okay? You could attend and go whatever you wanted to. You would get mileage, of course, reimbursement. You'd get meals if it was, approved out of county travel and that kind of stuff. But it would eliminate, for the most part, all the discussions about reimbursements, and who gets paid for what and how much. It's a half hour, it's not a half hour. So that was the idea behind it. So when I kicked the hornet's nest is when I brought this up was, I felt it should be a county board discussion where you have the information, you can look at it, we can have that discussion and decide to do this or not do this. Okay? There is one other thing to mention on this, and that was there is a provision in the statutes, and I think Dan had talked to this, and Grant had told us this at the meeting, or admin meeting, that if you went over 40 meetings in a year, you could also get additional per diem. So you'd get, in that case, you'd get the $6,500 for the salary. Okay? If you attended more than 40 committee meetings in a year period of time, you could also get additional per diem. So the question would be, do you want to do that? You could say additional per diem would be as currently laid out, okay, and keep that in place. If everybody was on 4 committees, you'd roughly get to 48 meetings easily, 48 to 50 meetings, depending upon your attendance. So that was the basis for this paperwork that you see in front of you, and the idea behind it. Okay? So now I'll throw it up for discussion. See where you want to go. Again, we're looking, this is a draft. If the majority wants to do this, it would go back to admin committee, and admin would bring back whatever.
Okay, can I just clarify?
Please. Ken.
So if you just look at page 72, let me just explain it to you once. And again, this was, again, something that, just talking with Mark a little bit, trying to find what we consider somewhat of a cost neutral, although you'll see it's more, but we're also looking at projected, I guess, savings in some ways. But what you're looking at is a county board chair, we left that at $10,200. Then the county board members, we put at $6,500. And then what we did is we put a $250 stipend in essence for a committee chair. So if you're a committee chair, for each one of those chairmanships that you'd have, you get an extra $250. Again, so you're looking at our costs under 2015 and then 2016. We really couldn't do a full comparison on 15 because that was a transition year, obviously, with the committees and so forth, so you don't get the total cost. Likewise, for 2016, you'll see, just for example, Dan is showing a difference, a significant difference, mainly because of his part of his chairmanship salary was included in that as far as the difference. But in essence, what you end up is you'll see what you would potentially, I guess, redeem in terms of your salary as far as the committees, and then the total cost related to that. Again, the only thing I would caveat is that if the county board does want to do something like this, but also wants to do the above 40 meetings, then I would think that you want to knock down the salary of that $6,500, because if you do the $6,500 plus then you go for per diem over those 40 meetings, we will be in excess of where we're at now. So I'll leave it at that as far as discussion.
Megan?
Ken, is that with having the cost for conferences figured into that as well?
Like WCA?
WCA, legislative
Well,
meetings,
again,
all of that, because that would be included in our salary.
Correct, that's all part of your salary. So I
So
guess,
is that included in the cost breakdown?
yes,
Okay.
except for example would be the mileage. That's going to depend on where we are.
Laura?
Or you have a salary and you have a less per diem, you change that? Because you're saying having less salary with that per diem, that's what you said, correct?
Correct.
Per meeting? Or do it the opposite, you have a salary and you go less than per diem after the 40?
Yeah, one way or another, yes.
Right.
But the whole idea is with this, the way it currently is that it's a salary and the time, like you said, the time you spend at home, the time you spend at conferences, the time you spend at meetings, the time that you travel. I guess under the salary, we're trying to recognize all that and you get that set rate. And hopefully that accounts for all of that as far as your effort moving forward as a county board supervisor.
Steve?
I had to sit and think about this one a lot the other night, and looking at it from a voter standpoint, a constituent standpoint, I don't know if I like this just because you're not really able to hold your supervisor accountable. You can't really see what he's doing. You know, I mean, I know it would simplify things, but I just somehow, I don't know if that, I guess I go through it just the same way in business, is deciding when you convert the employee from hourly to salary and what the good points are and the bad points of doing that. And I just don't know as elected officials if I can quite grasp it.
The only thing I could say that I kind of mentioned at the meeting, it's similar to, let's say, Joel Kitchens was here. You know, we're paying him to represent us and to do his job. If he doesn't do his job, then your opportunity to speak and voice that through voting. Again, is it account for that exactly all the way through the process? But I mean, that's in essence what you're saying. That we're.
I mean, I worry. I mean, are we going to have committees that, you know, isn't enough attendance to make a quorum? You know, things like that. People that don't put the effort into the job at all because they're going to get their paycheck whether they show up or not. And, you know, you don't. I mean, yes, you're held accountable by the voters, but there's a lot of voters that don't watch what's going on. I mean, we all know that, or we'd be getting more phone calls than we get now, you know, so, but, I don't, just not sure.
Nancy?
As a former clerk of court and elected official, I wish I would have got paid by the hour. Because if I got paid by the hour, I'd have made a lot more money. You know, my husband used to say I didn't ever take vacation and take any time off. But, you know, you work. If you want this type of job, if you're going to bother to go out and get nomination papers and you're gonna run for a job, you're gonna show up for it. And if you don't, the electorate will, make sure you don't come back.
Helen?
Well, I'm kind of along those lines, I think. Supervised salaried people, I would say the majority of people will work to the, whatever the work is. There are a few people out there who will figure out exactly how many hours they will need to work for that amount of money, and they will work to that, work to whatever they figure out. But I think the majority of people will work up to what the work entails.
Anybody else?
Dave? You know, personally, a lot of Steve's comments fit with me. Personally, I do see a lot of people that are paid salaries that throughout the world that seem to put less of an effort necessarily if they don't think they're getting paid what they should get paid. And then there's other individuals that absolutely go way overboard, and EMS is a good example of that right now. But I kind of like the idea of equating the time I spent to what I'm going to get paid for that event. I do, you know, RPC is a perfect example of a committee. You do spend an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 before you even get to the meeting. You don't get paid for it. But I'd rather see that I get paid for the hours I spend at that meeting than not having, you know, knowing I'm going to get paid $6,500 a year regardless of whether or not what I do at the meeting in general.
Susan?
I'd like to try it. If in 2 years we discover that people aren't doing their job, then maybe we go back. But frankly, I think if the public saw how many hours we spend debating per diems and arguing over this, they wouldn't elect any of us back.
Laura?
No, I didn't have anything.
Well, I was just curious if you have any ideas of any administrative savings with the salary process, and whether that would be really, if that would kind of offset it. It would be saving, we would be saving money administratively.
Well, that's a loaded question. Well, I just know the time that Jill spends going over all the vouchers and then finally getting those out and correct. I mean, it's a lot of time that her office spends, and then obviously, I mean, the mileage will still come up, so I guess we're still in essence processing payroll in that sense for the mileage, but in my mind, there obviously is time savings and administrative costs, and it's a time that we spend trying to track meeting times. So I think there's efficiency to it. I really have no skin in the game either way, whatever way you guys decide to go, but obviously, from my standpoint, it's more efficient.
But Jill is on salary, right? So it means she's gonna have more that she'll be able to do if she's not doing that, right?
Yeah, right. Megan?
I just want to make the comment that I get asked pretty often by, well, people have mentioned, you know, getting younger folks involved and people that are working, whatever else. I get asked pretty often, so what's the compensation like for that? And I go through the entire breakdown with people and their eyes glaze over and they're like, oh my gosh, well, that's not so bad. You know, when I'll say like, you know, it's $50 for the first part of a meeting and this much for a county board meeting, everything like that. And then I'll add in, I'm like, well, when I do the hourly breakdown, it ends up probably being like $12.50 an hour on a, you know, good month, sometimes less. And I'm like, but again, that's not necessarily why we're doing it. So I'm fully supportive. I think most professional positions are salaried for the most part. And this is, I would consider this a professional position. So I'm fully supportive of trying it out.
Right.
Most municipalities are salaried. And we find that we work a lot more than hours in there, but more than what we're compensated for. So, yes, I would vote for this kind of setup.
Laura?
I would think too, going salary would maybe, if people can't attend or if they have an appointment, the chair or something that you don't see meetings change around or switch, that if they just can't attend, they can't attend and move forward. I'd experienced some of that. So I think just keep it consistent. If you can't make it, can't make it, but it's not hurt. You know, if you're really concerned about making the money or the extra $50. If you get ill, I had an emergency this summer and I wanted to be present and I was really hurting and I probably shouldn't have went, but I still wanted to be present. So that was my dedication point going forth. It wasn't a money issue at all. So that puts perspective. And also, is that so then with the conferences being included, then they take away the issue of how many people are going, correct? So we can still get the education that we want, and to be a new person or somebody that's been around for a while to get other updates. So.
Biz?
I talked to a supervisor from another county and they're salaried. He said he has attended meetings in the last, during this term where they didn't have a quorum. And he said that's really a disappointment. When you go to a meeting, you don't have enough people there. So he said some of the supervisors figured, I'm salaried, I'm going to get paid. I can do something else today. I don't have to go to any meetings, and you're still going to get paid. And as far as this saying, well, they'll get voted out of office, that's not true. People that have been around, if they run, they're going to get elected anyway. But that's a concern, that you're going to have people, they're not going to get as involved. You may wind up going to meetings and there's not a quorum. So you're there. I guess you can still have the meeting, but you can't conduct any official business, if there's not a quorum. I think that's the way the rule is there, but that's a concern.
Steve?
And on that same note is how efficient what happens to our efficiency when that happens?
Yeah.
That's, we do make the final decision, so if we can't have committee meetings, or if they get postponed and what doesn't get done, what balls get dropped because of that happening.
Nancy?
On the same note, isn't that how it's done now? If you cannot make a committee meeting, you let your chairman know, and they either change the time, the date, or whatever, if he's not going to have a quorum. I don't see how we wouldn't still have the same situation.
Ellen?
Maybe we could have a wall of shame and those people that.
There you go.
Yeah, or a penalty box.
Right there.
He's leaving though.
And Laddie can get it with the TV camera.
You go to the salary then, are we going to change how you apportion the committees out between the boards? Some of us have more, some of us have less, some have more availability, some have less availability.
Another good point.
I can't answer that question until we decide to do it or not do it. But generally speaking, I would imagine the committee makeups would change slightly, as they will with any election that would be coming up. We try to give everybody similar number of committees. We try to give everybody chairmanship if possible. That process would still probably be very similar.
And a savings at the administrative side, but yet this comparison here shows a $21,000 difference in cost for 16.
Again, in my mind, that's probably conservative. Again, remember, if you're doing conferences and all other kind of stuff, that all accounts into that.
Right.
So between the conferences, whether they go or not go, and whether they attend, I guess that's just, we're doing our best estimate. And again, I'm trying to do it, I guess I was trying to do it more on the conservative side of trying to say that although there's some additional cost there, I'm trying to bring value to what you guys are doing. I'm kind of in a hard spot. I was trying to be somewhat what I consider net neutral, and I'm trying to also look at aspects of where we potentially see savings and not have other savings. So I guess I'm trying to balance that out, to be honest.
Dave?
Yeah, I guess, what would you be doing with supervisors, at least in the past, that have been gone for 2-3 months in winter? How are you going to adjust the salary for those?
You get paid.
They would get paid in this case.
And I guess a comment to Roy, comparing town government. I've got 12 years' experience there too, and we don't have that sort of committee set up though, so it's a real different scenario than here at the county.
Yeah, and just as a note, my town does it different than that also. We do have a salary, but then we get paid per diem per meeting.
Those combination.
That's against the statute.
Wrong government title. In a town, yes.
Anybody else? Okay, so
That's what
show of
bothered me to
hands,
see that it's
who
not
wants to see us move towards the salary?
It almost looked like female.
What was that comment?
Well, is this in addition to, okay, so if we stay with the per diem, you know, I showed favor that one way to stay at 150. If we move to the salary, are we
It gets
saying
wiped out.
at the schedule?
What do you mean at the schedule?
As proposed by,
that's the one.
by our administrator here?
Ken mentioned lowering the per diem after 40.
Okay, wait.
No, okay, there's nothing to do with 40 yet.
No.
That would be, somebody would have to add that to.
Okay.
Right.
So-
I guess our,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I guess our biggest thing is that we need to have a final version for you to vote on next month at the 14th, because they have to be done before papers are taken out. So we either have to, in essence, go with the amendments that you did with the per diem, or we go to the salary and give it a try. But we need that direction today, because whatever we bring back, you guys have to vote on, because it has to be done before people take papers.
And it is literally a choice of either staying with a similar compensation that we've been doing or changing historically to a salary, which is a flat dollar value until you exceed 40 committee meetings.
Nope, well, no, so let's take that back. It's a flat, the way we have it proposed, we're saying, again, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just saying, right now, the way it's presented to you, flat salary period. If you go over 40 meetings, you're still getting paid the same salary. If,
So we're not taking
Correct.
the other addition, okay.
correct. If, and that's what David's saying, if you want to say, I prefer the salary, but I also want to introduce the per diem above 40 meetings, then that is a third option that has not been discussed.
Okay, I made the assumption reading the regulations that it was included at over 40.
No, so what we're saying right now is traditional as
Compensation
is.
as traditional,
As it
or
is.
6,500 or something similar to it annually.
Correct, period, yes.
Okay,
So I guess we need,
Oh, yes.
okay, then that's what we need to show of hands. If we had, so yeah, I guess we just need to show of hands, how many people would want to do the salary? Because I guess we're taking that as the majority. That way we'd make the edits, because we have to make significant edits, we drop a lot of that stuff, and that's the way we would draft it and propose it at the next meeting. We need a show of hands for that,
Just salary.
Are you ready? Yes, show of hands, please.
just salary. 6, 7, 8.
Wait.
Again?
Do it again, please.
Higher?
Eight, okay.
Okay. So that means we are not going to do, well, we have 2 people absent, but I guess right now we're seeing that it's going to remain the same.
That would be good, because some of these people that are voting to go salary are voting to give themselves 75% and 40% raises. And
Did you
here we
call
sit
me?
there and they talk about how they want to save the money for the taxpayer. Now, I'm at the high end of the scale, but I've been here a long time. I'm on some real good committees. I'll admit that. If you guys want to penalize me and take money away from me, go ahead and do it. I'm okay with that. But don't sit there and talk a good game about how you're so concerned with the taxpayers, and you vote for yourself a 47 and 75% tax or pay raises. I mean, how two-faced can we be?
Actually,
I counted 9 or 10.
So,
I don't even know if I'd be losing or making right now.
No, there was 7.
Did you vote me?
No,
Did
you
you
didn't.
vote me?
didn't.
I'm sorry.
So she's 9.
I wanted
You
to
gotta
vote
give
for
people the
just the
vote.
salary.
You technically would have had 11.
So there's 8.
We did a count, I think we.
there were.
Do it again. Throw it,
One more time.
Yeah, do it again.
but keep your hands up. if
Keep your
you're-
hands up high enough so we can see them.
I don't really care one way or the other.
I don't care one
8.
way or the other either.
9,
9.
And how many people are here?
19.
There's 2 missing.
Okay.
3 missing.
Hi.
3.
Oh, that's right.
3
You
missing.
have 3 minutes.
I forgot about city.
So 18.
Yeah, that was
18
odd.
is exactly half.
So it's half.
Okay, so we're at,
Oh, there's 9.
So you only have 18 present, right? So it's 50-50.
9.
Well, those
But still loses
Grant.
because we don't have.
It's
We
defeated.
only have 18 present.
It's defeated. We're back.
So it's
It's
50-50.
defeated. We're at our regular
50-50.
way of doing it.
There's 18 present. It's 50-50.
yeah, yep. Okay, so that's defeated.
Yeah.
It's defeated, 50/50.
Okay, so we'll bring back the per diem as it currently exists with the changes.
75%,
What?
41%.
a dumb question.
Some of the others.
On page 72,
So you're,
the proposed
Excuse me, please, quiet.
salaries,
Page 72.
if we were going to go salary, you had said that, no, that would include WCA conferences, any conferences, so we wouldn't be paid extra for those.
Correct.
No, so the difference is a little different. You don't have that figured in here, right? Because, I mean, like, say, my salary in 2016, it didn't include my going to any conferences, right?
Sure it did.
It was
Yeah.
just strictly the meetings?
Nope, it's salary. That's included in there.
That was what your
Anyway,
W-2 would have
okay.
said, right?
Moving on.
Your W-2 would have said.
Yeah, it's kind of what your W-2 is.
416 and 415.
And there's a few of us that have 4 months that aren't even on here.
Right.
Right.
Weren't elected until.
I really agree the way this is all being done. It's good.
You know, might get some better numbers if we do this again next year. You know, just put new numbers in.
It'll be 2 years.
What's 2 years?
It'll
We
be
have to
2
go 2
years.
Or
years.
Pay
2
two.
years, I'll pay 2 years, yeah.
Nope,
But-
Mark.
Half-ass.
Mark's got it.
Mark, sorry.
Just a clarification, because my guess is we're going to have some of the 18 of you that remain that go back right away, pull out your W-2 and compare it to this list.
That was my comment.
Remember that your W-2 is done on a cash basis. So that is, if you got paid between January and December, it's on your W-2, regardless of when the meeting was. So you may get paid for some of your December meetings in January, it's going to show up for the following year.
Not
So-
a year to
So
year.
if you take your W-2 and compare it to what's on the list, it should be relatively close, but you could be a couple $100 off one way or the other, depending on when you got paid for that meeting. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
So the only thing I want to do is avoid a number of you going back, pulling out your W-2s, comparing it, and I'm getting calls this afternoon or tomorrow that this list is bogus because it doesn't match my W-2. Chances are, there may be nobody here for whom it does actually match. It's going to be off one way or the other, but it should be relatively close, within a couple of $100, because of those types of situations.
Hey, Mark, I'm not on the list anyways.
I was added later,
No,
so
I'm not.
you're not on.
Your name is spelled wrong, that's all.
Indigo.
So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay.
All right.
The vote was null and void.
Yes.
It was even.
Why was there a meeting last month? 20 minutes?
I
Okay,
don't
next
know.
item, World Committee reports.
Everything's exactly the same.
Committee minutes, vouchers, claims, and bills, announcements. Sorry?
David,
Yes, sir.
oral committee reports, I want to say that on Airport and Parks on November 7th has been moved from 8:30 to 1 o'clock because there's another meeting at 9 o'clock. Just so everybody. Okay.
Okay, Dan, since you brought it up, Highway Committee is changing to 9 AM.
Joel said he could make 9 o'clock, yeah.
Okay, and Risk Management at 11:30. The Museum and Archives is at 1:30 on Monday the 13th. That should be the changes. Next regular county board meeting is November 14th and 15th if necessary, at 9 AM. The per diem code for today is 1024.
No?
That's 4.
It's 4 letters, it can only be 3
It
numbers.
is. I know, it's like so out of the ordinary.
So we do it anyway?
Yeah, we're gonna do it anyway.
Wow.
10:24.
That's not the way it's written.
Mr. Chairman, if no further business be transacted, I'd like to make a motion, we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Second, I'm sorry, where's the second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
10:24.
Thank you.